Boom, and we're live. How are you, Dom? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great, Joe.
Pull this
Thanks
sucker right up close.
Okay.
There you go. I know you've done podcasts before. You did Tim Ferriss's podcast. I heard you on that.
I did, yeah.
Excellent.
Like 3 of them, I think I did. I'm on for 3.
3, really?
Podcasts,
oh, I need to listen to the other 2 then. What is this wine you brought me, man? This is crazy.
That is...
Do you think I'm a drunk? Is this what this is?
Maybe the Dry Farm Wines guys think that.
This is a giant magnum. I'd have to have a party.
It's
down this sucker.
It's wine that's pretty legit in regards to if you want to stay on a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
And I tested this in my office, actually, and just found that it's non-glycemic, for one thing, which means it doesn't impact, the sugar content is so low, there's not an elevation in blood glucose, and I can stay in ketosis on this wine. If I do 1 glass, 2 or 3 starts to kick me out, but 2 glasses of wine, you can completely stay in ketosis.
Interesting. 3, most wine will kick you out of ketosis?
Yeah, I mean, it's highly dependent on like a Merlot, a dry wine typically doesn't, but
is Merlot more dry?
Most of it, yeah. Most of the time, yeah. White wines tend to kick me out more, and of course, something like a sweet wine will
like
kick
a Riesling
you out.
or something like that. Yeah, really sweet wine.
Sangria, that'll kick you out very fast.
That's just sugar. Yeah,
and even beer does, even though it's supposed to be low carb, beer tends to kick me out.
Really?
It's a Michelob Ultra, maybe 1 or 2, but other than that, yeah. I mean, I get that question a lot, so it actually got me interested into studying this, so I can answer some of the questions with some level of knowledge. And after testing these wines, and I came to the conclusion, yeah, you can drink 2 glasses of wine a day on a strict ketogenic diet, and I mean, this is important for people that are doing it to manage their health long term.
Right.
And
especially people with actual health issues where ketogenic diet benefits them, like epileptic.
Absolutely. Like when I got into this, it was pediatric epilepsy, like in 2007 or 8. And now the applications are expanding, a dozen or more. So we hold a conference, a metabolic therapeutics conference, where top tier people in academia and like from Johns Hopkins, they're probably one of the spearheaded ketogenic diet application clinically, and top-tier scientists like from Yale and Harvard and other places present here. And it's I think it was like 11 or 12 applications for the ketogenic diet where there's good peer-reviewed research to support the efficacy as a metabolic-based therapy for a number of everything from polycystic ovary syndrome to acne to rare, even genetic disorders like Angelman syndrome is something that we're studying. It's a genetic disorder where a housekeeping gene is mutated, and it results in seizures and motor function impairment. And the ketogenic diet is remarkably effective. It's really drug-resistant seizures that these kids have, and even in the presence of a persistent molecular pathology, a genetic pathology, the ketogenic diet, through altering metabolism with the ketogenic diet, you can largely silence the pathology and the motor function impairments associated with this disease. And that's amazing to me, that you have a disease that is persistently there due to a genetic mutation, and you can largely silence the symptoms,
that
the
is
seizures.
Amazing. In the interest of addressing people that are probably on the ground floor, and I feel like there's very few people today that don't understand what a ketogenic diet is, but just in case, for people who don't know, there are people that use carbohydrates mainly for fuel, and then there's the ketogenic diet, which makes your body run on fats and ketones. So just kind of explain that to people, like how this came about, how people started researching this, and how you got involved.
Okay. I mean, this goes back, if not centuries, like millennia, dating back to the time of Hippocrates, when it was observed that fasting was a quote-unquote cure for seizures. And with the observation, so fasting puts you into fasting ketosis, right?
So even intermittent fasting, like I do the 14-hour thing, where
14 hours, that's clinical. I mean, technically, that's kind of, I call that a semi-fasted state when you achieve that. When you're eating breakfast, it could be 12 hours or more since you've eaten last, and you're breaking the fast essentially. But with severe epileptic patients, it was found that when they restricted food and in some cases water, after about 2 or 3 days, you had profound seizure control, where it silenced even the worst seizures. And this was observed, for millennia, like I said. And there was some work done in the early 1900s and 1920s. There was some work done at the Mayo Clinic that observed the presence of these ketone bodies in people that were eating a carbohydrate-restricted diet that was primarily based on eating fat, and with a minimal amount of protein, just enough to ensure there's not protein, malnutrition. And it was observed that there was an elevation of ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate in the blood. So they called it, physiologists called it the ketogenic diet. Even technically, maybe beta-hydroxybutyrate is not a ketone, but physiologists called these ketone bodies beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. And it mimicked the physiological state of fasting in many ways. So if you were to draw blood off someone on a ketogenic diet, it would sort of look like they had been fasting a few days. Because it's mimicking, the way I think about it, it's suppressing the hormone insulin and kind of mimicking the fuel, the substrate utilization that you would be using in a state of being fasted, which is primarily fats, ketones, and to a lesser extent, glucose from amino acids from protein. You are mobilizing some gluconeogenic amino acids from your skeletal muscle when you are fasting. Ketones are protein sparing, though, so they are anti-catabolic in that way. So because we make ketones and our large brain has a massive demand for energy, and the ketones fulfill that for the most part when fasting, it prevents us from breaking down muscle. It prevents us from liberating the gluconeogenic amino acids that would otherwise, be chewed up and used to maintain our glucose levels. So the ketones sort of replace glucose. The brain has the metabolic flexibility to adapt from using glucose to using primarily ketone bodies. And those ketone bodies really have a protein-sparing anti-catabolic effect.
Now, is this an ancient system that was in place back when people, obviously couldn't go to the store and your diet varied depending upon what was available, and it just allowed people, like maybe Inuits that lived off a lot of fats because they really don't have many carbohydrates if you're living off of whale blubber and things along those lines like they had to back then?
Yeah, it's hardwired in humans and obviously in other animals. My wife studies manta rays, and they're like the Einsteins of the sea. So they're the fish with the biggest brains of all animals, and we've done metabolomic studies on them and looking at the blood, and they produce a significant amount of ketones, like 2 millimolar. They dive really deep, so it may help protect them from that. So yeah, animals will go into ketosis during fasting, or even if you manipulate their food source. The Keto Pet Sanctuary actually treats dogs that have cancer, and they implement a ketogenic diet in dogs in addition to some other things to help, and many of these are dogs taken from kill shelters, and put them on an anti-cancer therapy program, and
now,
they can get into ketosis.
For the most
it's
part,
harder, but
most dog food is not ketogenic. It's like dog foods have grain in it, right?
Yeah.
For fillers and things along those lines.
It's really interesting. I was talking with Ron Penna yesterday from Quest Nutrition, the CEO of Quest Nutrition, and he brought to my attention that if you look on a package of dog food, you won't see carbohydrates listed, even though it's the primary, because there was some laws or policy put into action to prevent carbohydrates from even being listed on kibble, on dog food, which
Why?
I find, there's a lot of reasons why, mostly because dogs really shouldn't be eating a carbohydrate-based diet, and that's probably part of the reason, but there's sort of other reasons why. But it's really important so the food that the Keto Pet Sanctuary gives the dogs that have cancer, and they confirm that they have cancer with a glucose PET scan, and they do it, before, during, and after, is basically kind of like a raw foods ketogenic diet that's almost completely restricted in what we would call glycemic carbohydrates, things that would elevate the glucose levels. And it's very high in fat, relatively speaking. Yeah, but dogs, really should not be eating any kind of grains at all.
Yeah, I feed my dog grain-free dog food, but I don't know if it's carb-free. I don't know what's in there.
Is it kibble?
Yeah, it is kibble.
It's hard to find out.
Right, yeah.
Dog food that has like some peas and sweet potatoes and things like that is okay. But ideally, you want to give your dog like a whole food nutrition, just like humans. They say don't give your dog human food, but there's no evidence for that. And I've given talks where I talked about giving dogs raw food. And there'd be a reaction from the audience. Well, it's dangerous to give your dog like raw food. Well, what do they eat in the wild? I mean, if it's ground beef that's been sitting around in a processing plant for a while, yeah, maybe. But fresh, meat from a butcher or fresh meat, I mean, it's probably the ideal thing for a dog. Ideally, organ meats like liver, heart, kidneys, things like that. Grind it up. And some greens too, some things like spinach. You can buy like spinach powder. So the Keto Pet Sanctuary has an ebook that's completely free if you go to ketopetsanctuary.org, I believe. And you can download this ebook, and it tells you very precisely how to make your dog food, not only to if your dog has cancer, but to maximize its overall performance. And you are preventing cancer by virtue of putting them on a diet that optimizes their metabolic health.
Well, that's got to be very difficult to package, though, in something that's sort of evergreen, sits on the shelf and a paper bag you can rip open and just pour into a bowl. That's what everybody wants.
Yeah.
It's like this convenience thing, but
there's a way to do it, and I know those guys, like Epigenics Foundation. They are working. They basically support the Keto Pet Sanctuary. And they're working out not only the macronutrient ratios that need to go into the food, but also the types of food, and also being able to package it in a way to ultimately come up with a food that you can go. It may not be on the shelf, and probably ideally shouldn't be on the shelf, but it'll be like in the refrigerator section of your pet food store. So you go there, and like for our dogs, we get like a tube of freshly ground up steak or whatever, and we feed that. We take the ground meat and mix it with organ meat and mix it with different greens like broccoli and things like that, and give it to them, and they love it. We put a little bit of coconut oil on it sometimes. So you would go to the grocery store, or it could be shipped to your house, and it's basically kept refrigerated, and it has the complement of like organ meats to the proper types of fats, fish oil fats and fiber, and it fits that macronutrient ratio of the ketogenic diet.
Your dog must have horrific farts.
One of them does. Yeah, we have a Great Dane. They're both rescue dogs. One of them does.
I'm hearing broccoli, organ meats, and coconut oil. I'm like, whoa, get out of the room.
Yeah. It's either my wife or the dog. I don't know. She might be. Might
be blaming the dog.
Yeah, might be blaming the dog. But they're healthy.
How long have you been involved in ketogenic research and research on keto diets, and how long have you been doing it yourself?
Yeah, I guess I got turned on to it in 2007 or 8. And actually, I was communicating online on a nutrition forum on a fitness website. And I was a neuroscientist. I did my Ph.D. on cellular neuroscience. I did something called patch clamp electrophysiology, where I electrically record from neurons. And it was, really mostly just neuroscience. And my postdoctoral research was studying seizures. And I got to the point where we're doing some drug-based research on seizures and other types of research. And the types of seizures that I study are powerful tonic-clonic seizures that a Navy SEAL could potentially experience using a closed-circuit rebreather. So when they're underwater, a limitation for their time underwater is CNS oxygen toxicity. And it's also a limitation for hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
So rebreathers are those ones that don't emit bubbles. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there's a bit of a stealth component. So you're underwater, and if you're going over a lake to engage the enemy, they can't see you coming. So that's the advantage, that they're very stealth-like. The disadvantage is that at 50 feet of seawater, in just 10 minutes, you have the potential to get CNS oxygen toxicity. Of course, if you follow the guidelines and dive within the guidelines of the depth and the time, then you're typically okay 99.9% of the time. But if you have someone shooting with a 50 caliber machine gun into the water, you're not going to want to come up. You're going to want to stay down there. If you have a mine to go down to the bridge or a ship or something, you have to likely in many cases go down below 50 feet. And it puts you at the potential of having a seizure. And a seizure underwater, the seizure itself is not deadly per se, but having a seizure underwater could be fatal to the mission and the warfighter. So my research was really developing various technologies where we actually put things inside inside a hyperbaric chamber, like an atomic force microscope or a laser scanning confocal, or we can look at the mitochondria under pressures that simulate these operational conditions. And that was about 10 years ago. And out of that research evolved studying various things and looking at the cells and even the mitochondria and observing that ketones essentially enhance brain energy production and resilience in extreme environments of high pressure and high oxygen. And from those cellular studies, I became more interested in what people do when drugs don't work for epilepsy, and I looked up and found the ketogenic diet. And I was like, this fits in perfect because my background was studying nutrition, and I was studying pharmacology at the time, but it allowed me to bring nutrition back into my research program and studying the ketogenic diet specifically. And the program officer at the time at the Office of Navy Research really liked the idea of the ketogenic diet in a drug. So being able to consume something that can elevate these blood ketone levels, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and make our brains kind of super brains under physiological extremes. So that's what I put my efforts into studying the ketogenic diet and also into developing and testing a wide range of exogenous ketone products, and which are on the spectrum of drug-like to on the spectrum of kind of natural-based things that can be combined together that put you in a state of therapeutic ketosis within like 30 minutes to 60 minutes. So you can use it right before an operation, right before a mission, or therapeutically. So if you have a child, for example, that has status epilepticus, which is continuous seizures that you can't stop, instead of giving them an anti-epilepsy drug that can have side effects and even developmental delays, the ketogenic diet, takes 24, 48, maybe 72 hours to work. But if you can tube feed them a ketone supplement and put them into therapeutic ketosis, then you can mitigate these seizures, which could have potential long-term effects. So that's just one example of a therapeutic application of exogenous ketones. But
so you're doing the research on this, and you decided to start doing it yourself.
Yeah, I started doing it myself to get a better understanding. Actually, there was a patient in the UK. His name is Mike Dancer, and if you just kind of Google Mike Dancer and epilepsy, you'll come up on his story, which is a really remarkable story because he tried a half dozen, maybe even a dozen different types of anti-epileptic drugs and high doses of things like Keppra, like things that are the standard of care, and it didn't work for him. He connected with me, and I mentioned a couple supplements before I embarked on the ketogenic diet, and long story short, I gave him the information, kind of here's the ketogenic diet, here's the scientific rationale. It looks like before you go and have brain surgery, they were going to remove part of his hippocampus.
Whoa.
I said, just use this. And that was maybe about 2008 or 9-ish. And long story short, I didn't talk to him because I got really busy. I transitioned into a tenure track, assistant professor position. I was working very long hours. Maybe 4 months or so went by. And then when I contacted him, he was like, I have not had a seizure in this time. And he was having multiple seizures, sometimes per day, and couldn't leave the house. And it was almost like a proof of concept. And it also caused pretty significant body composition changes in him. And he was in the fitness industry and even did a bodybuilding show. So he basically it saved him. It saved his life, actually, because he had what I would call, and what the doctors call, terminal epilepsy. There was no way to control seizures. And when the drugs failed, the ketogenic diet worked for him. And that was almost like proof of concept. I thought the ketogenic diet was kind of like this fad diet. I just knew about it in the fitness circles as something that I would actually typically avoid. But when you read about the history of the diet in the 1920s, early 1920s, and how Dr. Wilder kind of developed this therapy at Mayo Clinic, there's like really legit peer-reviewed research behind it, an enormous amount of research. And I realized it was a grossly underutilized, what I would call metabolic-based therapy for seizures.
Why would you typically avoid it?
Because in our healthcare systems, there's really not the infrastructure. When a patient comes in and they have uncontrollable seizures, the neurologist or epileptologist typically does not have the skill set in nutrition, knowledge in nutrition, to be able to guide a patient successfully into nutritional ketosis. And to do that, so they would have to refer them to a registered dietitian, which typically are not savvy in ketogenic diets. But now the Charlie Foundation is a foundation that works closely with Johns Hopkins, and I think there's about 150 to 200 clinics worldwide that are ketogenic diet clinics that have, registered dietitians that are working to assist patients. So now, the infrastructure is kind of there. But doctors typically will prescribe a drug whenever they can. And even when they know, most of them are probably aware that, it is the standard of care. The ketogenic diet is the standard of care when drugs fail. And there's things like vagal nerve stimulation and other things. But the ketogenic diet has been around so long, it has an amazing track record. There are some side effects associated with it, mostly associated with the classical ketogenic diet, which was like 90% fat, like 8% protein. But now Eric Kossoff at Johns Hopkins has done a lot of work on what I would call, the modified ketogenic diet. He calls it the modified Atkins diet, which is more liberal in protein. It's 20 to 30% protein, and the balance being mostly fats from healthy sources, and the carbohydrates are just, completely non-glycemic carbohydrates you get from salads or green vegetables and things like that.
What are those side effects?
So with the classical ketogenic diet, they found that kids put on the diet, it reduced IGF-1, which if you're into longevity, that might be a good thing, right? And it reduced their terminal height in some cases because of the protein restriction. So restricting protein can, for reasons we know in the longevity field, reduce IGF-1 signaling, insulin and IGF-1 signaling, and that was found to be the case in kids. There's the suspected mechanism. But when protein was kind of titrated back in, that was not the case. So there's also kidney stones can happen, and there's a supplement, potassium citrate, that can help kind of offset the mild metabolic acidosis that occurs when you go on the ketogenic diet. And just simply, you could do that nutritionally just by formulating your diet and using more salt to balance out, using more minerals.
So essentially the big issue is just the protein.
Yeah, I think the protein for kids that are growing and developing, and if you restrict protein in kids that, have all these growth factors and everything that really kind of require, and also if you go on the ketogenic diet, you may be inadvertently limiting total calories just because of the palatability of especially the classical ketogenic diet, whereas the modified Atkins diet, which was studied very rigorously at Johns Hopkins by Eric Kossoff, has shown to have like 90% of the benefits of this draconian classic ketogenic diet. And when possible, you know, it's better to put, and that's what I follow. I follow modified Atkins, which is just higher in protein.
So let's establish the protocol. Like, so the classic ketogenic diet is 90% fats, 8% protein, 2% carbs. Is that what it is?
That's about the macronutrient ratios, yeah. And they call it, clinically, they call it the 4-to-1 or the 3-to-1 ketogenic diet. And that's really confusing because that 4-to-1 is in grams, right? So it's actually like 4 parts fat to 1 part protein and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates being very, very small part of that 4-to-1 ratio. And a 3-to-1 ratio would be, and that would be like 92% fat. I mean, it's really high. And then the 3-to-1 ratio is like 88% fat or close to 85% fat. So I like to do it. It's better. It's more easy for me to consider in terms of percentage of calories. And about 75% calories from fat is pretty doable and pretty palatable.
So that's how you do it.
Yeah, 65 to 70%. And it's super important for people, not only in the clinical realm, but also people that are doing this, you know, for athletic reasons, for, you know, losing body fat. Managing type 2 diabetes is probably the low-hanging fruit of all these applications, and I could talk more about that. The biggest thing to do is to count your macros and test your ketones, of course, but people are horrible at counting how many calories they are getting in when you tell them to follow a diet. So they really need an app, a software program, an app, and Avatar Nutrition makes the kind of gold standard app for tracking your macros, and I'm working with them hopefully to develop.
What's it called?
It's called Avatar Nutrition.
That's the actual app name?
That is the app name, and that's it's a very highly innovative app that not only does it, you know, you put in your macro, it's a macro calculator. Those that macronutrient profile is in the system, and you do body composition measurements weekly, and it calculates through what I would call an artificial intelligence system, an AI system in the algorithm, to adjust your calories week by week based on the progress that you're making. And it's the only system that I know of its kind that's like a macro tracking system that also gives you feedback on how to titrate your calories and your macros over time to hit specific body composition changes that you want to get. And this is the system. It's the ideal platform to incorporate the ketogenic diet into. So it's going to take some work with the guys that are writing software to design it, but essentially, you'll have available a ketogenic diet app that will be able to adjust to whatever output that you want, whether it be managing seizures, maybe a metabolic management of cancer, or body composition changes or performance changes over time, and that's all being written up.
Now I got a bunch of questions. First of all, what are your primary fats? Like when you tell someone that your diet is, I mean, forget about the classic 90% fat, but even 75% fat, people just go, Jesus, like where's all that fat coming from? Like what do you use for fats, and do you vary it?
Yeah, my diet's pretty. I get the same 12 to 15 foods, probably pretty much every week. My wife kind of eats outside of the range of the ketogenic diet, so sometimes.
How dare she?
Yeah, how dare she? I don't try
Does she
to
eat pasta in front of you and mock you.
She does, but I don't crave it, so that's the thing.
You don't at all?
She thinks it's really strange. I don't
But
crave
aren't you
things.
Italian?
I am, so that created
How
a bit
weird.
of a problem with my family. Like
I
when
would
I go
imagine.
home, I grew
Lasagna
up on
and stuff?
pasta.
Oh yeah.
So my carbohydrate tolerance is actually really good. So if I go back to a higher carb diet, I can't throw in 300-400 grams of carbs a day, but I tolerate it very well. So me going into a ketogenic diet was a very strange thing for me to do that. I had read Rob Wolf's book and knew about the paleo diet, and even some of the writings of Gary Taubes, but I was a little hesitant or skeptical about it. And
Why were you skeptical?
Well, I really thought that you need carbs to grow in the gym and maintain your strength and performance. And I just felt that the brain needed glucose for fuel. And I didn't, I was kind of unaware of the research that was done in Harvard in 1967 by George Cahill. And I did get a chance to talk to him before he passed away.
Rob Wolf is, Rob is really into jiu-jitsu right now.
Yeah.
And he's having an issue with maintaining a strict ketogenic diet. I don't know if he's going with the classical ketogenic or the modified Atkins, but he has a problem with like having the carbohydrate restriction when he has really hard training days.
Yeah, I've talked to Rob about that a little bit. The body is incredibly adaptable to switching fuel sources and adapting to that fuel source over time. And some people may be a little less adaptable than other people. But I think that if he was to give it, knowing Rob, he did give it a very legit shot. He may benefit from adding some slow carbs in just prior to an intra-workout, during
like
his
yams or
MMA
something
training.
along those lines. What do you consider a slow carb?
There are supplements out there, but if we're going to talk about
foods,
I would say maybe a little bit of sweet potato in prior to training or the day before, maybe a few hours before.
So it's some sort of a carb with plenty of fiber, something like digest slowly. Is that the idea?
Yeah, even a high molecular weight carbohydrates that are on the market now.
What are those?
I don't use them anymore. I know Jeff Volek has a product out. UCAN, I think UCAN starch is the name of it, and it just it will slightly elevate your glucose and not trigger an insulin response, so you won't go hypoglycemic after, and it'll just essentially titrate in carbohydrates and glucose into your system over a predetermined period. So they know that it'll kind of hit your system and sustain it for 3 or 4 hours, which is ideal for people engaging in MMA or cycling during that time frame. But I think, if you're getting in a sufficient amount of calories, and if you are using things like creatine monohydrate, which work through the phosphagen system, you are able to generate ATP for those short bursts of power that you need to manage your opponent and sustain it.
So for a supplementation, if you were going to supplement creatine, would you do that prior to the workout? Or like I know a lot of people take creatine post-workout.
Yeah, I just if you're taking creatine, and you stop taking creatine, it's in your system for a couple days to a week or more. So it's just on a daily basis. Doesn't matter necessarily when you take it. It's just that you take it on and probably at least 3 grams per day. For a larger guy, 3 to 5 grams per day.
Is that something you take?
Yeah, it's one of the few supplements that I take. I only take maybe 3 or 4 supplements. I used to take all these different supplements, so I'm more of a food guy. But maybe I take 3 or 4 supplements, and I use some of the new food products that are coming out on the market now, ketogenic food products, and that allows me to maintain my ketogenic diet when I'm traveling.
Do you ever mess around with beta-alanine?
Yeah. It's something I use to increase carnosine levels, right? It's something that I used in the past. I don't like the tingles that I get. A lot of people like the tingles.
Like niacin type tingles?
Tells them, it's
not quite that extreme?
It's like niacin, but it's working
freaky.
through a different receptor. Yeah, the first time I took niacin, I thought I was going to die. But it's unpleasant. It's not something that, some people look forward to it. And those people are strange. But
yeah, it's weird.
The beta-alanine makes me uncomfortable. But I remember drinking it on the way to the gym. It was part of my pre-workout formula. And it just made me itchy. And I just didn't like it. And the data's a little bit. It's not what I would call compelling, but it looks like it may offer a benefit.
It was just recommended to me. That's why I brought it up. So your creatine 3 grams per day, and what do you weigh? About 215, something like that. What do you weigh?
Yeah, on the mark. Yeah,
I'm pretty good at that.
I lost some weight.
Fighters.
Yeah, that was like almost exactly. So I had a couple of weeks ago. I got down. I did a mission with NASA, and I was underwater for a while. And when it came back up,
how long was a while?
I was under for 10 days.
Jesus Christ, that's more than a while.
Makes me an aquanaut. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
So, and during that time, during the training for it, I was doing a lot of swimming, which was I sink like a rock. I'm kind of negatively buoyant. So
me too.
I was. It took a lot out of me, and I tried to get into my file that I was like closer to 200. I think maybe you'd be more likely to be an astronaut candidate if you're like lower, because weight and space is a big thing to me. So I tried to get my body weight from 226 down to 207, and I did. It took about 3 months, and now I'm creeping slowly back up. I'm down.
What did you do to do that? Just high aerobic workout?
Just
calorie restriction.
I did intermittent fasting. Really, just transitioned to a diet where. I typically eat a ketogenic breakfast that's kind of small, and I would made that a little bit smaller, and 2 or 3 days out of the week, on average, I would just kind of not eat until dinner, and then I would eat a substantial dinner, and then maybe do some activity after that, and then kind of nibble at nighttime, maybe an hour or 2 before bed. And that was kind of my routine.
So almost like a warrior diet type deal?
Pretty close to that, yeah. From what I know, that's pretty close to that. And I did not in any way feel deprived of food. And that's really, people who follow a low-carb diet or ketogenic diet, they think you don't have to count macros, which is like the biggest mistake. They think you just go on this and you don't have to count calories, but you really do. I mean, you could sit down in front of the TV with like a bag of cashews, and I can polish that off pretty quick. And you could do a lot of damage. Like, that's a lot of calories. So it depends on the kind of foods that you're eating.
2 handfuls of almonds, I think, is like 500 calories or something crazy.
Yeah.
That's like, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. So I talk to people who follow the ketogenic diet, and they're like, the ketogenic diet doesn't work for me. I got on it, and I gained like 3 pounds. And I was like, well, what was your calories? What was your macros? Oh, I have no idea. I was told I don't have to count that.
Yeah,
that's the most important
stuff.
thing.
Yeah.
So this is the function of the app I told you about, Avatar, which is kind of a macro counting program. Right now, you can set the adjustments to do low carb, but once the software is written up for the keto option, that will be a tremendous resource for people, the average person that wants to do the ketogenic diet, and hopefully we're going to craft it in a way too to help the clinical community too.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, is because you're an actual scientist, and there's so many misconceptions when it comes to ketogenic diet, the benefits, the problems associated with it, and and there's a bunch of people that one of the things that I've found really fascinating is recently, because the ketogenic diet has become so popular, there's been these sort of sparsely educated meathead trainer type dudes that are poo-pooing the ketogenic diet. And whenever I see that happen, I go, oh, here's a person whose ideas are threatened. And, you know, like whenever someone says the ketogenic diet's not beneficial or it says it's not really worth it, I'm like, okay, but you're not saying anything. Like, where's the science? Like, point to something. Because there's a substantial amount of science that shows the benefit of the ketogenic diet. But there's a lot of meatheads that are that have been critical of it. And when I read that, I'm like, okay, you're not saying anything. Like, there's no substantial reason why you're critical of it. This makes me think that you have been pushing a certain type of diet for a long time. This comes along, it shows contrary evidence, and you're trying to diminish it in some sort of a way, but without any actual science. So what have been the criticisms of the ketogenic diet, and how many of them are actually valid in terms of when I'm talking about, when I'm talking to people, especially if I'm talking to professional athletes, I'm talking to athletes whose very health it's very critical that they have energy, right? We're talking about fighters. Yeah. So for them, like to recommend a ketogenic diet to a fighter, it's very tricky because you're talking like 1%, 2% performance could be the difference between victory and defeat, and maybe even being knocked out or submitted and being successful.
Yeah. So I think most important, people need to appreciate that when you transition your body from burning carbohydrates and glucose and forcing it to rely primarily off fat and ketones for fuel, or not, it's not one or the other, but you're shifting for the predominant fuel source to be fat and ketones. And that's not something that happens like overnight, and it doesn't even happen in 2 or 3 weeks. So what I've seen in elite level cyclists and other types of sports is that it really takes a minimum of like 3 months, ideally 6 months, and even after a year, I think you're getting changes even at the epigenetic level. We know that ketones function as a signaling molecule through histone deacetylase activity, that it's actually turning on genes that's causing adaptations in our body. And these happen slowly over time. The more you follow the ketogenic diet, the easier it gets because there's a learning curve to implementing it. But the more you follow it, the easier it gets and the more benefits you derive from it over time. And those benefits really don't start to emerge, the benefits that I'm thinking about after about 2 or 3 months. And
you're talking about benefits on a cellular level, not a performance level?
Okay, from a performance level, a minimum of 2 months. Like, your performance will go down. So you have to accept, I mean, this is something that fighters would have to do in the off season.
I was stunned.
Athletes
I was stunned at how much of an impact it had on me. I mean, I thought...
I mean, how fast were the benefits?
Well, the benefits, the weight loss was pretty significant pretty quickly. I lost a few pounds like within the first week or two. Yeah. Whereas I'm pretty active and it's not, I didn't change much other than that. But what I was amazed at, like the keto flu, what people call the keto flu.
Did you get that?
The dragging. For the first week or two, like I was just and I would do like a hard workout and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how long I can keep doing this.
Yeah, okay, that's normal.
like a big one was hitting the bag. That's when I would really feel it because I do rounds where I'll set like a certain amount of rounds, a certain amount of time, and that's when I could really feel the difference from day to day, and I was really struggling.
Yeah. And how long did it take you to adapt to that, or did you adapt to that?
It felt like a month in, it started to normalize.
Okay.
Like
I mean, that would be consistent with the literature. If you're looking at cyclists and if you're, a number of different athletes, it takes about 6 weeks. I mean, your performance will go down and then start to creep up back to baseline at around the 6-week mark. And if you adhere to it strictly and really stick with your training, in the 12-week mark, you could be breaking new PRs, depending on
personal
the sport.
Records
Personal records, and that's primarily directed to, I would say, endurance athletes, ultramarathon athletes, to cyclists, to runners, to Ironman athletes. And the thing that emerged out of all the emails that I get of people sending me blood work and their performance measurements is that I used to think it was about, a month or two. It's more like 3 months to 6 months when they really start hitting their stride. Because I think there's pretty profound changes when you alter the fuel that you're giving your body in such a profound way.
Well, one of the first things that I noticed, one of the first benefits was cognitive, like a clarity. lack of fogginess towards the middle of the day, the no desire to take a nap, and no drop. Like, I would have the big meal thing and then the drop, the valley, when, like, oh, your body's like digesting everything. And then I thought that was just how you lived. I thought there was no getting around that. That's life. You eat, then you get sleepy. I didn't think that there was any other options.
Yep.
Going on a ketogenic diet completely changed that. And when I would tell people about it, they're like, nothing? I'd be like, I'm telling you, there's no difference. I mean, I would eat a meal and go throughout my day, and then it'd be like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, where's this crash? It's like, the crash is supposed to be here. Like, where's it coming? No crash.
Yeah, same thing with me. I mean, looking back in undergrad, when I was like task loaded with a lot of classes and stuff, I was trying to, bulk up at the time, and I would put like steak or beef on a bagel. So I would cut a bagel kind of in half and then put like meat and stuff. So I would be getting all the carbs from the bagel, and I would just go get a big Starbucks coffee to mitigate that crash that I would have. And now, so the ketogenic diet, when you eat a meal, it essentially, if it does not abolish, it significantly attenuates that insulin response that you get. So if you, wear something like a continuous blood glucose measurement, like a Dexcom or something, and you look at that and you eat a standard American diet, you see a big spike up in glucose typically, and the postprandial dip in glucose, that'll be hypoglycemic. And when you do that, not only does your mental and physical performance crash, but you crave food. So that will send you running to the refrigerator again to seek a reward to mitigate that dysphoria, I would say, that you get from the hypoglycemia. So when you on a ketogenic diet, you essentially abolish that. You don't have this spike in glucose, which spikes insulin, and your energy levels are maintained. And the big thing is cognitive. So the cognitive resilience is a big thing. So even if you're hypoglycemic, you could like use something to lower your blood glucose like insulin and push it down to a level that would put someone into a coma. And if their ketones are elevated, they are asymptomatic for hypoglycemia. Wow. And this was a study actually going back to the work done by George Cahill at Harvard, where he fasted subjects for 40 days. And he did a battery of, cognitive tests, and he measured blood going to the brain and blood coming away from the brain. And he determined that about 70% of brain energy metabolism is derived from ketones when you're fasting. And the same occurs with a ketogenic diet too. So you are literally switching the fuel source that your brain is using. But in an extension of the study, he injected 20 IUs of insulin and pushed glucose down to 1 millimolar, which is universally fatal in everyone. So you take a crowd of people who are eating a standard diet and push it down to that, they'd all die. So none of them died in the study. I have no idea how they got it past the IRB, the ethics review in Harvard Medical School, but they did.
What year was this?
1967. Oh. And it was a study I became completely fascinated with because I couldn't believe that they did it. Because you can't even do it in animals nowadays. The IACUC committee, the Animal Care and Use Committee, would put a stop to that very quick. They would probably send the investigator, out of the university if they even proposed to do some of the studies that were done. But when they lowered blood glucose down to that level, which would, put someone into a coma, the subjects were asymptomatic for hypoglycemia because their brains were keto adapted. They had essentially been over a week in a fasted state. They were all kind of heavy set. They were divinity students. And a few, I think, were Harvard medical students. So they tend to be overweight. So they were liberating a lot of fat from their adipose and making lots of ketones. And they were in a state where their brain was tremendously resilient against hypoglycemia because their ketones were elevated. And that has practical implications for so many different, and I was reading this and couldn't believe what I was reading. I called George Cahill. We talked about it. I called all these old-time, physiologists that were in the field just to pick their brain, and they were like thrilled that a young guy, just entering a tenure track position was going to like kind of make this his career. This goes back a ways. But I saw all the implications, not just for epilepsy, but for things like Alzheimer's disease and traumatic brain injury and a whole host of neurological disorders. Like there's one in particular called glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome, or GLUT1 deficiency. And the kids that have this literally have a deficiency of the glucose transporter on the blood-brain barrier. And their blood glucose is normal levels, but the glucose in their cerebral spinal fluid is under 2 millimolar, which is, their brains are essentially living in hypoglycemia. So they're constantly having seizures. They can't move. A lot of them, they're confined to a wheelchair. You put them on a ketogenic diet. Many of them wake up. They start walking around. Their motor function is reversed. So the ketogenic diet restores brain energy metabolism in these kids that can't use glucose as an energy source with this disorder. It's called glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome. And another very interesting example of a disorder where there's a persistent molecular pathology where the symptoms can be largely silenced with the application of a ketogenic diet that needs to be pretty strict. And that's where ketone supplements come in. So I was, it's difficult for some of these kids to follow a ketogenic diet. So a ketone supplement can potentially circumvent the dietary restriction that's needed for a ketogenic diet and make it easier for parents and kids to implement. But I also think that a ketone supplement can just further elevate ketones if you're on a ketogenic diet and further augment the therapeutic efficacy of the ketogenic diet or performance enhancing efficacy. So my main application is the warfighter and maybe astronauts too. So we just think of it as a way to further augment a therapeutic effect or a safety effect when it comes to divers or a performance effect when it comes to warfighters or divers.
Now, when you excuse me, when you talk to people about mental performance, have there been studies that have shown any variation between the same individuals on a ketogenic diet or a carbohydrate glucose-based diet in terms of mental function?
Not good studies. Yeah, not really good studies. What has been done, the first study, I would say purely ketogenic study that I'm aware of, used something as simple as medium chain triglycerides. And it was actually a substance that the chemical name was AC1202, and that substance, it was in the patent listed as a substance called AC1202.
And for people unfamiliar, that's just MCT oil, coconut oil.
Yeah, so if you were to pull this patent, interestingly, my colleague and friend, Dr. Mary Newport, did and wrote a book on Alzheimer's disease about the use of ketones for Alzheimer's. She identified that the ingredients in this supplement that help to enhance cognitive function in people with mild cognitive impairment, the ingredient of this, if you dig into the patent, was caprylic triglyceride, which is a medium chain triglyceride, which is MCT oil. And they did a study, it was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study that showed that people who, interestingly, they were not ApoE4 positive. That group did not respond, but which is another kind of pathway we can go down. But their improvement in cognitive function correlated with their elevation in ketone levels with this supplement. It was a fat that when you consume it, independent of the amount of carbohydrates you consume, it converts that fat into beta-hydroxybutyrate, which you can measure with a little blood meter. And as that level creeped up, and it didn't even have to creep up that high, it was like 0.6, that they were getting significant improvements in the mini mental status tests and other tests that are sort of like the standard tests for Alzheimer's disease. And that really got me interested because I knew that levels could go up way higher than 0.06. And they're showing that there's a correlation as ketone levels rise up, that you have a proportional increase in cognitive function. So I'm thinking with a ketone ester or other types of ketones, you could elevate that to 1, 2, 3, and 4 millimolar and then get some really robust, because that's sending a lot of energy to the brain. So every millimolar of beta-hydroxybutyrate that's in your blood it's been estimated that it gives you like your brain about a 10% boost in energy.
That's incredible.
It can restore energy up to 10%. If you look at if you do an FDG PET scan and a ketone PET scan, so you do a dual imaging for that. Dr. Stephen Cunane in Canada has done some work on that.
But that's insane. That it was so like for college students or someone who's studying for an exam or someone who's about to do something very important, exogenous ketones should be like standard, right?
Well, yeah, there's some pretty good evidence to show, but especially if you have a deficit, right? So, and actually, the application that I'm using it for is in an extreme environment when your brain is already at a deficit. But we could say we're all at a deficit, right? So tomorrow I'm jumping on a red eye and I can't sleep on a plane, and I land, and go to my university where I have to teach for a couple hours and then drive a couple hours north and give another lecture at night, and I'll be on 0 sleep. And I would not even attempt that if I was, wasn't doing what I have been doing. Like, I've kind of figured out protocols where I can allow me to function even on extreme lack of sleep, and be able to, motor through it.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No
so
problem.
when you land, will you immediately take some sort of an exogenous ketone? Some sort of what do you take? Like, what are your ketone supplements?
There's a wide variety of ketone supplements on the market. So
Right.
I'm kind of a food guy, so I just use them almost kind of sparingly, but I do tend to use them every day. The supplements that I've packed in my bag are the Ketogenic supplement is one that I'm been using, and also the Prove It Keto OS product that mixes beta-hydroxybutyrate salt with MCT powder. So there's a couple other forms of just beta-hydroxybutyrate, but our studies show that just consuming beta-hydroxybutyrate does not give you, at least in the ketone salt formula, does not give you a lot of the benefits that we see in some of the studies that we're running. And the beta-hydroxybutyrate needs to be mixed with medium-chain triglyceride fat, and that's pretty important. And I think that has a number of benefits. The medium-chain triglyceride delays gastric absorption, so it also further boosts ketone levels higher than you could get with ketone salt alone. So you get an elevation of ketone levels that's sustained for longer, and that sustainment is due to kind of delaying gastric absorption, because the fat kind of delays the release of the ketones into the bloodstream, and it's stimulating your own ketone production. So you're taking a fat, right? And that's what happens when you mobilize body fat. You have a wide variety of enzymes that convert that fat into ketones. If you take a ketogenic fat, the same thing is happening. You're revving up that system in addition to the exogenous ketones. So the Prove It product, Keto OS, Ketogenics, and there's a couple other companies emerging on the market. We have our own company, Ketone Technologies, and we are partnering with government agencies like Department of Defense, ONR, and NASA to do research, to fund research with these institutes to really nail down the optimal formula for anti-seizure effects, the optimal formula for motor function effects, the optimal formula even for strength. And the one with strength will probably involve, adding amino acids, adding creatine monohydrate. So these will be formulas that will be optimized. So our company is working on that. We don't have any products yet, but if you sign up for the newsletter, we will update people on the newsletter, and then when the products do come out and emerge, we'll kind of let people know.
So when you say you're a food guy, are there any foods that you can eat that will
Sardines? Yeah.
Sardines.
Yeah. So I travel with this trip it was canned chicken and sardines. So there's a couple. Wild Planet makes a good can, and Tim Ferriss. I kind of turned him on to it, and it really exploded. The company kind of emailed me and thanked me. They're really exploding. So it's a small company. They do
They're called
Wild Planet sardines, and they're packed in olive oil, and they're might be, depending on what you buy, like a little bit of lemon. They might have a slice of lemon or lightly smoked or whatever, but they are really, really good. And I look forward to eating them. For me, I'm kind of weird. That is a treat for me. And that's, I've taken a lot of different things and experimented with a lot of different things, and simply just eating sardines, it's like the perfect food. And eggs too are the perfect food. You asked me where I get my fat from. I do get a lot from the olive oil that are packed in the sardines. So I eat a lot of fatty fish, lots of egg yolks. I will make an egg yolk omelet, and I'll give the whites to my dog for protein, because they need a little bit more protein. So I'll make an egg yolk omelet, and I will cook it in butter, and maybe make some asparagus on the side, cooked in butter. So I get a lot of fat from macadamia nuts, a few nuts, sardines, fatty fish, a lot of salmon, and a lot of egg yolks, and fatty cuts of meat. So we go to the butcher and particularly pick out fatty cuts of meat. And olive oil, coconut oil, MCT oil are all things that we use.
Have you ever had issues with sardines and heavy metals?
No. I think heavy metals are more of an issue with larger predatory fish. I think swordfish would be kind of at the top of the chain there. Of course, you're eating a mako shark or something like that.
Right.
You're going to be ingesting, and if you do that on a daily basis, I wouldn't want, if you're a pregnant woman, I would stay away from big predatory fish. But one thing about sardines is that they can be farmed in a sustainable way. And the amount of heavy metals will be typically proportional to the size of the fish and whether it's predatory.
The reason why I'm asking is I was eating sardines like 2 cans a day for a while, and I got my blood work done, and there was like a very trace amount of arsenic in my system.
Oh, arsenic.
And the doctor said, like, what are you eating? And he was going over the different things. And I said, I eat a lot of sardines.
Do you know
And
where
he's
it came
Cut
from?
those out. The sardines?
Yeah.
No, store.
Okay.
I don't know. Just whatever was on the shelf.
I mean, we travel all over. We were in Borneo and Malaysia and Indonesia and all these places, and you see some boats coming in, and those sardines are going to various plants. And even bigger companies, will source out wherever is cheapest.
Right.
So I like to be pretty particular about, especially if I'm going to eat something in such a high volume, like where it's coming from, to actually like visit the plant and where it's coming and get some information to where it's coming from. I do use some of the meats from ButcherBox. So ButcherBox offers a wide array of meats from grass-fed animals, and that's a lot of our meals at nighttime are from ButcherBox. But that's interesting about the arsenic. Arsenic can get concentrated in the ground where plants are grown in. So if rice is grown in China or whatever plant is grown in China, and that soil has arsenic in it. I lived behind our house. We had like a peach orchard, and apple orchards are notorious for this, for having high levels of arsenic just based on the chemicals, that were used over time. And so this is something to consider. Maybe it's something you're eating with the sardines, or maybe it was the sardines itself, depending on what the sardines are eating.
Yeah, the nutritionist was pretty convinced it was sardines when I cut them out in one way. Yeah, he was saying that it was probably just from pollution.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I mean, that's why it's really important to pick out, where your food's coming from.
So this company, you recommend Wild Planet?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Are they farming it? Is that what they're doing? They're farming the sardines?
Yeah, they have. There's different methods that you can use that would kind of put you in the category of sustainable farming for sardines. So it's one of the few fishes that are really low on the spectrum of having heavy metals and things. So if you're, there's women, I get this question a lot, like, if a woman becomes pregnant, should they stop eating fish? Should they stop eating, ahi tuna or swordfish and things? I would say, yeah, definitely the big predatory fish you just probably want to cut back on. I did take a couple courses in neurotoxicology where we went over like mercury poisoning and every possible chemical, and just the take-home message was, for the normal person, probably not an issue. Unless you're consuming really high levels. In grad school, I was eating these big cans, like 12, I think there were 12-ounce cans of tuna fish, and there was like 5 servings per can, and I would eat like 3 cans a day. Like I would take that and add, I was fat phobic at the time, but it would be a chunk like tuna, and I would put balsamic vinegar on it, and I would literally eat 3 of these 12-ounce cans a day, and that would be 15 servings of tuna per day, and I did that day in and day out. And
no ill effects.
Well, I never got tested at the time. So nowadays, I tend to do a lot of blood work just to check different things.
Right.
But no overt signs of, toxicity or anything. Maybe like a little, someone, one of the professors that I was doing something for, she had, or her friend had lost a lot of hair due to eating tuna that had high mercury. And at the time, like, kind of had a lot of hair loss at the time. It was also kind of a stressful period. So maybe when I stopped eating it, I noticed like, this is back in my mid-20s now. I haven't had like significant amount of hair loss since, and a couple people have, and actually that's one of the symptoms too of mercury toxicity.
Oh, wow.
Just weird tingling and feelings, like kind of neurological effects. So just something to consider. But getting tested is probably a good thing to do.
Yeah, I've heard that from people that just consume ridiculous amounts of sushi.
Yeah.
But I would imagine like sushi, you're dealing with smaller portions of the actual fish itself.
Yeah, it might be. If you do that day in and day out, it's probably good to get tested. And sometimes, it may not show up in the blood, in the serum. You might have to look at the red blood cell, because sometimes, some of these metals are more reflective of the levels on the red blood cells, or the hair too. So there's different ways that you can measure it.
I read that you eat, was it canned oysters as well?
Yeah. Yep, that's something I usually bring. I think I brought on this trip too, like canned oysters, King Oscar. There's a few brands out there that I kind of vetted out for things. And oysters are really rich in a lot of micronutrients that you could get depleted in on the ketogenic diet. So B12 is something. I do supplement magnesium too.
How could you get B12 depletion from ketogenic diet? Where would that come from?
Well, it could be due to sources of B12 that you're kind of eliminating through food choices on the ketogenic diet.
B12 is basically an animal-based
yeah, for pretty much, yeah. And I've never or I think I did measure that once and it wasn't, but people have reported to me that it was. The thing that showed up on my blood work was lower. I was on the low end of magnesium, and I was getting cramps at the time. And that's the only, you asked about side effects. So the only side effect that I experienced was cramps at nighttime, always between 3 and 4 in the morning. And it would start in my foot and then start to creep up to my calf. Or if I did like legs or something, sometimes my hamstrings. And then the magnesium supplementation really prevented much of that.
Have you ever used an isolation tank?
No.
One of the cool things about isolation tanks is that you get magnesium through the water.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, because the water's filled with salt, and the salt has magnesium in it,
I think there's pretty legit science behind that. I was traveling in Israel, and I went to the Dead Sea, which is really high in magnesium, and it has a calming effect, which is reportedly due to the very high magnesium levels and other salts that are in there. So the magnesium is relatively small molecular weight. That anything with a molecular weight like under 300-400, I think can get into your bloodstream.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why people like those Epsom salt baths. I think that's one of the things that relaxes people.
Yep.
Yeah, and Epsom salt baths you're talking about a very small amount of Epsom salt in comparison to a tank, which has. My tank is 1,000 pounds of Epsom salts in it and 11 inches of water. So, because you're so buoyant, you just
you do this daily at your house?
No, not daily, but whenever I want. Because it's in my basement, I just go down there and get into it. But it's the relaxing effects is pretty profound.
That's interesting. You know what? It brings to mind I've had at least a half dozen emails about doing Epsom salt baths from ALS patients because ALS is associated with a chemical called glutamate, which is excitatory amino acid transporter, and high magnesium levels can kind of mitigate some of the excitotoxic effects of high glutamate. And there's fasciculations that they get and muscle twitching that they get, and they found that dosing magnesium or these Epsom salt baths, higher in magnesium can calm them down and also maybe mitigate some of the twitching that they had, which is probably a reflection of glutamate-induced neurotoxicity. So the cells are dying, they're releasing glutamate. So it may be neuroprotective in that way. And it definitely, I know magnesium, you can feel it. Like if you take a legit source of magnesium that's bioavailable, like magnesium glycinate or other forms of magnesium, you can really feel kind of a calming effect that it has.
Yeah, it makes sense. A lot of people like to take it before they go to bed.
Yep.
Yeah, but the tank is just when you get out of there, your whole body just feels relaxed. I mean, I think part of it is because of the zero gravity effect of floating and
you're floating. Calming. Like you're very buoyant,
yeah.
right? In this because the water is very heavy, right? Like the Dead Sea, like only maybe a third of your body is kind of floating in it, right?
Yeah,
or half of your body.
Essentially half your body. Essentially, like your ears are underwater, but your face is above water. It's amazing. You got to try it. I'm a big proponent of it, but the ALS, is there a benefit in the ketogenic diet for people with ALS?
Yeah, that's another application. There's a guy, Dr. Passanetti, and I think he's in Mount Sinai in New York. He's got a couple studies on this, looking at caprylic triglyceride, which is a medium chain fatty acid, and he also, that's a clinical trial, I think it's ongoing now, but prior to that, he demonstrated in a mouse model of ALS, which is the SOD1 G93A mouse model, and it has a gene defect that mimics the familial form of ALS, which accounts for maybe about 10, at most 20% of ALS pathologies. And he found that a ketogenic diet improved motor function and some neurological scores. It did not improve overall survival, though. So we actually followed up on that study with a therapy that we call the Deanna protocol therapy, after Deanna Tidone. And her father, Dr. Vincent Tidone, observed that his daughter responded remarkably well to a few supplements, which was arginine, alpha-ketoglutarate, and GABA, and coenzyme Q10, and a few things that we actually put into a supplement. And we reproduced the same study using this gold standard mouse model. And we looked at motor function, we looked at neurological score, and then we looked at total long-term survival too. And we found that using medium chain triglycerides, which was a ketogenic fat, with arginine alpha-ketoglutarate, which is something that's in pre-workout formulas. It's a vasodilator from the arginine. We used GABA was in that, or phenibut, a phenylated form of GABA that crosses blood-brain barrier, and coenzyme Q10 in the form of idebenone, which is kind of like the drug-like form of it. I think it's still available. You can get it online. It might be kind of a drug, or ubiquinol, which is a powerful form. So those supplements together, I think, are neuroprotective in a way, and it had a therapeutic and what I would call performance-enhancing effect on this ALS mouse model. And those supplements had a therapeutic effect on Deanna-Tadone. I mean, there's other things in what's called the Deanna protocol. People interested in this can go to Winning the Fight Foundation. It's a Tampa-based ALS 501c3 foundation. And you can sign up on the foundation, and they give you the actual protocol. And there's more than 1,000 patients, registered on this that are benefiting from it. And there's several peer-reviewed studies on this. Ideally, we'd like to get enough funding to do a human study, but the mouse work's pretty compelling, and it's an extension of work that has already been done, really, and further supporting compelling support for this proof of concept for using a metabolic-based approach, like targeting energy metabolism, preserving mitochondrial function, so the cells work better.
Now, when you were talking about epileptic kids and supplementing their diet with ketone supplements, because a lot of them have a hard time following a ketogenic diet, can you get the same benefits of a ketogenic diet by following a standard American diet and supplementing with exogenous ketones?
I doubt it at this time with the ones that are commercially available, but I do think that with some of the ketone esters in development right now, we've observed using a range of different animal models that the thing is that these things are not very palatable. They're pricey to make, but we're working with various companies and doing what's required for the FDA to be generally recognized as safe for some of these compounds.
I don't think they taste bad. I've heard people complain about Ketogenics. I didn't think it was bad at all.
Ketogenics actually taste pretty good.
Yeah.
Don't let it sit. If you mix it up, that's one problem with the Ketogenics. If you mix it up and let it sit, then it's tastes like battery acid for a while. But so I mix it up, and if you just keep it with some ice cubes in it, you can probably keep it around for about a half hour. But I generally try to drink it pretty quick after I mix it up.
I don't have a problem with it at all. But some of them are nasty.
Yeah. Well, the ketone esters. So these are things that if I gave you right now, you would gag. You would not be able to drink it.
Yeah, somebody sent me some. Where's that, Jazz? Do we still have that laying around here? That little thing of ketone esters that some dude sent? It was in a sealed, little foil sealed plastic thing.
You might take it with you.
I don't think I did.
I'd be curious. I know all the
here it is.
people behind this.
No, that's not it. Huh? It was here somewhere.
Okay.
This place is a mess. Who knows? So if someone had a big bowl of pasta, and then they took something like Ketogenics, would that knock you back in the state of ketosis?
Yeah, you could eat a bowl of pasta and then consume a Ketogenics product, and then test your blood ketones, and it would look like you're on a strict ketogenic diet.
That's fascinating.
A mild, what I would call a modified Atkins diet, whereas. So the ketone ester, you could eat a bowl of pasta and then take a ketone ester, and it would look like you fasted for 10 days. So it puts you into starvation level ketosis. So interestingly, another application of ketones is that it lowers blood glucose. And we don't know why. We're studying that right now. But and it may do it by your liver is the main regulator of what your glucose is. So your liver has glycogen in it, and it's constantly being broken down and kind of spilling glucose into. It may be affecting that process, or it may be enhancing insulin sensitivity, which means you take ketones and your cells use the glucose that's there it becomes more readily available to the cells. There's greater uptake. So we're looking into precisely why, when you consume exogenous ketones, why glucose goes down. We've replicated it many times with different forms of ketones.
So would that be a way for a person who maybe is just not so good at being disciplined with their diet to just throw it in there? Like, say, like, God, I want some ice cream, but I've been really good with my diet. Fuck it, I'll just have the ice cream and then have some ketogenics or something like that afterwards.
Well, I firmly believe there's no shortcuts. Like,
Right.
And I think of ketones, and I think I mentioned this on Tim Ferriss too, and he put it in there, that ketones are just another source of energy. So if you're eating 2,000 calories of food and then taking lots of ketone supplements, you are eating a lot more than 2,000 calories of food, because ketones
as far as fat, but I mean, as far as like gaining weight, but
Yeah.
as far as like keeping your body into a state of ketosis,
Yeah.
it actually does work.
Absolutely. And the benefits of that would be maybe not weight loss, but by elevating your blood ketone levels, there's a lot of beneficial effects, even from a signaling standpoint, like completely independent of metabolism. We know that it's a super fuel essentially for the brain, that you can, your brain cells can generate energy from ketones in a more efficient manner than glucose.
That's
in many
crazy.
ways.
That's really hard for people to believe, because that's the one thing that people always would say. You need glucose to fuel your brain.
Under certain conditions. So there are a few stipulations to that, and I could get a little bit technical, but for example, I mean, obviously if you have GLUT1 deficiency syndrome, you're transporting it, but your brain has a number of things that can prevent it from using glucose effectively. So in many cases, ketones would be the preferred source of fuel. For example, there may be, like with Alzheimer's disease, or maybe even if you have traumatic brain injury, there's an internalization of the GLUT3 transporter, so that you have cells, right, and glucose is trying to get in, but the GLUT3 transporter isn't on the membrane. Or you can have a dysregulation or an inhibition of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, PDH complex. And that enzyme is really the gatekeeper. It's almost like it's the governor. It's the throttle that lets the glucose into the cell to feed into what we call anaplerotic pathways to drive the TCA cycle, the Krebs cycle. And that makes reduced intermediates that drive the electron transport chain to make ATP. So that it's like a gatekeeper. And ketones completely bypass that process. So if you have no GLUT3, if you have impaired activity of this PDH complex, which a lot of people who are carbohydrate components say, well, you're inhibiting the PDH complex if you're on a ketogenic diet, and I don't think there's evidence of that. But the ketones essentially bypass those steps and can restore and preserve brain energy metabolism, even if those things are dysregulated or dysfunctional. And a number of pathologies, make them dysfunctional. And it's just a general state of aging. It's thought that as we age, we have a proportional decrease in glucose energy metabolism in the brain, but that's not the case with ketones. So as we age, the data that has been collected so far shows that we have essentially the same ketone energy metabolism as from young to adults.
Wow.
So that's major implication. You can graph it out, and we've had speakers at our conference that did that, and you can see kind of like a plateauing effect and a decrease in brain energy consumption from glucose, whereas with the ketones, it bypasses many of the rate-limiting steps that are associated with impaired glucose metabolism in the brain.
It's almost hard to believe when you rattle off the laundry list of benefits of the ketogenic diet. For a lot of people, they're like, well, how is this? It seems crazy. I mean, it seems like it seems like everyone should be on it. And it seems crazy that so many benefits are attributable to this fat-based, fat-burning diet.
There's a lot of benefits. I don't, like my wife does not eat. I mean, she eats a relatively high carbohydrate diet
But
with
that's
sugar
because people
and things
enjoy
like that.
it.
That's because she enjoys it, and that's because her carbohydrate tolerance is really remarkably high. And some people do really well on high carbs. And
when you say
they
that,
enjoy
you're testing her?
Yeah, I've tested her blood and her ketones too, and she can get rapidly into a state of ketosis. I mean, we're testing some products now for ketone technologies for our company and various products, and it's the first time I've actually seen her ketones levels up where mine are and sustain it over a period of time, and she's like, this is awesome.
And this is just from taking a product?
For taking a supplement. Yeah, just formulation of specific products. Yeah, and so there are a lot of benefits, but it's just, I think of it as like one tool in a toolbox. Simple carbohydrate restriction, like it doesn't have to be a ketogenic diet, but simply restricting your carbohydrates is a powerful hammer, for example, for type 2 diabetes. And Virta Health is doing more for the medical management of type 2 diabetes than any other entity that I know of. I mean, I think their goal is in the next decade to reverse 100 million cases of type 2 diabetes. Like our government spends way more, it's like $200 billion of funding for managing diabetes. And, NASA's budget is something like 19 billion per year or something like that. So compare that.
Wow.
And we know that type 2 diabetes, for example, which is and obesity, the major problem for type 2 diabetes is carbohydrate intolerance. So why would a registered dietitian administer a carbohydrate-based diet to a type 2 diabetes person who has a problem with carbohydrate intolerance? And that's reflected in their elevated hemoglobin H1C or glucose levels or insulin levels. So Virta has created a platform of people who, using an app, will allow you to adhere to carbohydrate restriction and a ketogenic diet to essentially not just manage it, but just like completely reverse it. And I think the numbers are something like 89, almost 90% of people from the data they collected so far and published, almost 90% of people, maybe 89 or 87%, can either completely get off insulin or like reduce it down to very low levels just simply by using a carbohydrate restricted ketogenic diet. And that's profound. I mean, imagine the number of people that can get off medication, what that can do to the healthcare system, the healthcare burden of, paying all these dollars for drug management of type 2 diabetes, which is going up to epidemic proportions. So if people are out there and they have type 2 diabetes, just go to Virta Health and you'll see an amazing array of clinicians, basic scientists, and registered dietitians that assist people for the medical management of type 2 diabetes.
It's just stunning. I mean, the list is,
I was good. Like the low-hanging fruit is definitely type 2 diabetes, so I'm glad to see the field go into that direction. But for many, many years, many decades, the only application, when I got into this research, the only application was pediatric epilepsy. And then 2 years after that, it was like, it works for adult epilepsy. So it's taken so much time for the science to prove kind of what we already knew, right? That, therapeutic ketosis was supplying ketones to the brain. That's an alternative form of energy. And obviously that has more implications than just helping your brain for epilepsy. There's so many other applications.
When you're uncovering all this and when you're doing all this research and studying it and you're finding all these benefits, have you tried to figure out or contemplate, like, what is the cause? Like, why is it so beneficial for your body to live off fats versus your body to live off glucose? Is this something that we evolved to live off fats? Is this is it a better primary source? Is it something that our body can exist off of glucose, but really we're designed to live off fats? Like, what is the cause?
Well, it's there's many answers to that question, but I'll tell you kind of what I think. That many people do really well on a carbohydrate base with no overt signs of, pathology.
Especially really active people, right?
Yeah. So I would, in that class, like I always kind of joke, like the people that are most interested in the ketogenic diets, or many of them are athletes that contact me, but a lot of people have health problems too. But the athletes are typically not the ones who necessarily need it, but they can benefit of it. I mean, a lot of, if there's football players out there and people that are predisposed to concussion or brain injury, I think it's really good to be on a ketogenic diet. That's kind of like a whole nother area we can go into.
Now, for athletes, when you're talking about people that, like, maybe they don't need it for weight loss or they don't need it for a lot of, is it because the massive amount of calories that they're burning and their nutritional requirements almost mitigates the negative effect of having a glucose-based diet?
Yeah, it really does come down to calorie control. So if you have a surplus amount of calories coming in, even with an athlete, you're going to start to get some metabolic effects and negative, biomarkers kind of showing up. And if you do that chronically, it'll ultimately lead to chronic inflammation, maybe some, brain fog and other things. What I've observed is that, you're asking like, why? What was your question? Like, why aren't people not following this, or what's the benefit?
No. My question was like, because you're studying this so deeply, like, have you ever contemplated like what is the root cause? Like, why are we so good at burning fats? Why is it so beneficial? There's so many health benefits, and it seems like there's so many negative consequences of having a high carbohydrate diet, especially for sedentary individuals.
Yeah, I think you really, to put this in context, you have to think the negative effects from high carbohydrate diet are due to a calorie surplus. So I think a carbohydrate-based diet could work fantastic for a lot of people who count their macros, who manage their calories. But people are horrible predictors or estimators of how many grams of carbohydrates. They walk into the kitchen, they grab some grapes, they grab a chocolate. So that's why it's really good if they want to get a handle on this to optimize their total health and performance and things, to really have an app where they can calculate their macros in an easy, to do format like Avatar Nutrition does. So I think when you are bolusing glucose or bolusing carbohydrates a couple meals a day, you have that scenario that I talked about. You have a spike in glucose and a release of insulin. And for many people, which I had, was this postprandial dip in blood glucose where you'd go hypoglycemic after 2 or 3 hours, and that would have me searching for food again. I would get irritable, I would get sleepy, my performance would drop. When you go on, it doesn't even have to be like ketogenic diet, just low carb, can completely, in many cases, if not abolish, significantly attenuate that rise in glucose and that release in insulin. With a carbohydrate-based diet, you can throw in more fat and fiber and buffer that too. But a purely ketogenic diet is, kind of non-glycemic. Like, you don't have any rise in that. And the practical effects of that is that it tends to allow the person to control their appetite instead of their appetite kind of controlling them.
Yeah.
And appetite suppression and just and that's how it's thought that the ketogenic diet works too, is that you don't have these spikes in glucose and hormones and things like that that could set off a seizure, is that the leading scientists in this field really believe that it helps put the brain into a state of homeostasis better. And if there's less kind of energy spikes and less kind of noise in the system from a physiological standpoint, that the brain's energy system and the neuropharmacology of the brain itself, the neurotransmitters, the balance of GABA to glutamate and serotonin and other things will be balanced in a way that would make seizures much less likely to occur. So, and I think that's what it does from a feeding behavior, from a neuroendocrine point of view, is that it helps to, when you have all these hormones and metabolites going all over in the blood, the ketogenic diet keeps it into a range where there's a lot less noise in the system. And you can see this by a patient, a type 1 diabetes patient, for example, who goes from eating a high carbohydrate diet to a ketogenic diet where their Dexcom continuous glucose measurement is all over the place. If you look at, several days of data, and if they transition to a ketogenic diet, I mean, the highs, there's way few highs and way few lows, and it's within a tight range, and they stay within the range where they're optimized, I would say. So they're in a glucose range where they're optimized. And that's what happens. That happens obviously with a type 1 diabetic who's trying to chase the glucose with insulin. But for the average person, the same thing happens. And that's why a lot of people feel better, they have less cravings, and they're more likely to adhere and stick to their diet and not kind of fall off the wagon and kind of overeat and you have surplus calories. So high carbohydrate diet is completely manageable in people who know how to manage their calories, but that's really hard for most people to do. So I think the app-based programs that are coming out are really, really handy, and I think they'll be kind of the wave of the future for people who want to optimize their body composition and their performance, and to have a keto option of that too, where you can titrate and optimize your keto diet. And then there's an AI system that tells you how to improve those ratios over time to hit your goals. I think that's really the future.
The cravings, that's a huge factor. Not just the energy crash, but also the lack of hunger. it's really weird. Like I always felt like if you didn't eat for a few hours, you just started getting, God, I gotta eat, and you have this weird feeling. But that weird feeling is entirely connected to glucose. When you're on a fat-based, fat-burning diet, the even knowing that you're hungry is a different knowing. It's like it's in the other room.
Yeah.
It's not like it's like next to you, sitting on your shoulder, yelling in your ear, "Come on, man, let's eat." You know, there's a frantic feeling that a lot of people get when
I've seen it.
Yeah.
My wife, I've seen it. You know, when she's hungry, we got to stop. We got to pull over. Like when she needs ice cream, I mean, I just, you know, give in and say, okay, we're gonna pull over. And I remember feeling that way too when I would kind of go off the wagon and eat a half of a box of Toll House cookies. But yesterday I ate 3 packets of something called keto cookies, and I put some in your little gift bag there. Yeah, and these keto cookies, so I had never eaten 3 packets together, so I was curious. Oh, that's Energy Bits.
What's this?
Energy Bits is, I think, a fantastic supplement. So spirulina has an enormous amount of research behind it, and it's one of the products I used on the NASA NEEMO mission because we didn't really have access to fresh vegetables or phytonutrients down there. So
this is a snickerdoodle, huh?
That's a snickerdoodle bar, and then there's a chocolate chip bar and a fudge chip bar.
Where could one get these?
Just go to ketocookie.com, and so that's like my keto comfort food. So when I travel with that, I might have another box out there for you. So you have chocolate chip, you have snickerdoodle, you have fudge chip. So you can eat that. Typically, if I eat like a Toll House chocolate chip cookie, I would have that crash that we were talking about, and I would be ravenous, you know, after. There you go.
Pretty good.
So no sugar. It's completely like low glycemic. For me, they're like non-glycemic. So I measured my glucose after eating 3 packets of them because I went, there's the guys behind it. So I actually just saw them at the Low Carb USA conference where a number of speakers there were on the show. Gary Taubes was there. Rob Wolf was there. I didn't get to speak to him because it was just so busy. But Keto Cookie is, you know, one of those foods that's evolving out of this, you know, this kind of movement, I would say, that the ketogenic diet is becoming a lifestyle. So not something that's used for pediatric epilepsy, but something like the average person can follow to just feel better. And for me, I can eat a keto meal in the morning and I can hammer out 12 hours of work in the lab and not even get any cravings to eat at all. And that, for me, that translated into, you know, more grants, more publications, more work done in the lab. And I kind of attribute it in some way that, you know, my career has gotten a really big boost because I'm more cognitively aware and resilient. Even during periods of like sleep deprivation, I can just work longer periods, and I kind of utilize keto to my advantage in that way.
That's really fascinating. I really had no idea about exogenous ketones improving mental function. Like taking them to actually, like it would be a good idea to take them before anything taxing. I'm going to try taking them before podcasts and taking them before comedy shows or UFC events and see if maybe my brain fires better. Because, I mean, that's just amazing.
Yeah. My wife was actually, she spearheaded a program looking at absent seizures. So a lot of people who have seizures don't have like tonic-clonic seizures, but they'll just look and stare into space and then wake up out of it.
That's me all day. I'm having seizures, Jamie. I didn't even know. These cookies are good, man, but they feel like an illusion. Like
and you just got to try them. Try them.
Mirage.
Do you have a glucose ketone measurement thing?
Yeah, you know what? I did have that, but I have a lot of calluses, and I was like, I had to really stab the shit out of my fingers.
Yeah, you do. I thought I had calluses. I got pretty bad calluses, but I think you got them. So what was I going to say? Oh, so
is there a
anxiety.
Better way to do it other than glucose meter? Like that's the one that stabs you, because it wasn't really working that well.
Not really. I mean,
they say go in the side of your hand. I'm like, fuck, what the fuck, man?
Yeah,
Can't
so
even go to the fingertip.
I just take an actual syringe, like needle, and just plug it in.
You're hardcore,
I have,
bro.
so I don't really feel it. I've done it so many times, but yeah, taking exogenous ketones can help. We published a paper in Frontiers. It reduced anxiety behavior about 25 to 30% in our rats. So they would go out into what's called an elevated plus maze into the open arm where they're like on a catwalk, and they could fall off or be exposed to the environment. It typically produced a fear response, or they could run back into the little cave. And the beta-hydroxybutyrate salt plus the medium-chain triglyceride combination actually reduced that fear behavior. Maybe it would be, I mean, I'm sure you're completely comfortable being out on front of the stage, but for people that have anxiety problems, which is a big part of people who have stress, it kind of exacerbates anxiety. I mean, I felt it early on in my career. I know that being in a state of ketosis just makes me more mellow.
Well, you know, one thing that it would help me with is I bow hunt.
Yeah.
And bow hunting is...
I used to bow hunt, yeah.
Do you? Really?
Yeah, my brother, he was a big bow hunter. He writes for Peterson's Bow
No
Hunting
kidding.
magazine.
Wow.
And I saw Hoyt. I saw, we had Hoyt Proforce Extreme, I think, bows. Yeah, I grew up in a bow... I grew up in a hunting family.
Oh,
so I quickly noticed some of the stuff out near...
So that's probably one of the most stressful things I do. Like, people think that, like, doing stand-up is stressful, or live podcasts, or UFC broadcasts. Those are nothing compared to bow hunting.
When
like drawing back on a live animal.
And your heart starts racing.
Pounding.
And you start...
Adrenaline rush.
Yep.
And people have target panic where you can't remember what you're doing and you go into autopilot. And there's all sorts of methods to mitigate that by forcing your brain into a closed loop system instead of an open loop system, repeating mantras, going over different facets of your shot process. But maybe ketones and being in a ketogenic state, especially exogenous ketones before you hunt, would mitigate some of those ishes.
Definitely help. I mean, I think you've had him on the podcast, Wim Hof.
Yeah.
Like different breathing methods.
Oh, sure.
Something I'm getting into, was talking with Quest CEO last night about Buteyko. A guy in Russia designed some system that allows you. It's a program of breathing. I have the app on my phone. I haven't used it yet, but it allows you to increase your CO2 threshold. So the drive to breathe actually does not come from a lack of oxygen. There's CO2 chemoreceptors on the ventral surface of your medulla in your brainstem that sense CO2, and when they sense CO2, that's your urge to breathe. That's your drive, and then you have a backup, sort of like a redundant mechanism. The carotid bodies at the bifurcation of the common carotid artery right here will sense oxygen. It's kind of like more of a fail-safe. I studied these things, for my Ph.D. and these neurons, like how they sense things. But so you can increase your CO2 threshold over time using various breathing protocols, and that can create an enormous effect on kind of reducing anxiety in these situations where a big buck comes up and you're drawing back on it. Or, in general, just the level of oxygenation that you have. So retaining some CO2, if you do it through training, can actually enhance the vasodilation effect and can maybe reverse even and hyperoxygenate systems in your body. So that's the theory, and there's quite a few studies behind it. I really have to delve into the studies, but the Wim Hof Method is one method. I've been fascinated with him. I really want to meet him.
Actually, I wish I could introduce you if he was in
town.
I
would love that.
He's a great guy.
I want to bring him to the lab and actually do some research on him.
I'll set it up.
Okay.
I'll connect you guys.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. These cookies are like a mirage.
Yeah.
It's like you hold them, they have weight. They look like a cookie. You bite into them, you're like, this is going to be like eating a cookie. Yeah. And then you're chewing it, and it's almost like it vanishes, like fairy dust in front of your eyes.
But it's good, though.
Yeah,
right?
it's great.
It's really
no,
good.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a mirage like they're bullshit. I'm saying it's a very strange texture to them.
Yes.
Because obviously there's no grain. And there's something about eating them and chewing them where your body goes, hey, would you fucking lie to us? Where's the cookie, bro? Like, it tastes good, but there's something about chewing it and eating it. It's like it vanishes.
It's pretty substantial, too. There's a significant amount of fat in it. So I was a little...
Guilt-free.
Yeah, I was a little skeptical when they came. I was like, okay, because people send me so many products, and I vet out what actually impacts, my blood glucose and ketone levels. And then maybe about 10% of the products that people send me, I really like the energy bits here, that spirulina tablets. I can take massive amounts and actually get what's a significant amount of protein, and there's absolutely no glycemic effect, and I'm getting huge amounts of phytonutrients in it. So I brought that on.
You just eat these like a snack?
I down like 30 at a time.
It says 33 servings, 1,000 tablets. Jesus.
Yeah, so that would be like a month's supply. And you can chew them. They taste kind of grassy, and there's a little kip in there. Yeah. Or if you don't chew them, if you just swallow them, you don't taste them.
They don't taste bad.
And that's what I did.
It tastes like almost like sesame seeds.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Actually,
no, sunflower seeds. That's what it tastes like.
The lady, Catherine, she was on Shark Tank. And actually, they kind of slammed her because I think she evaluated the company high, or they didn't like the taste. That was the main reason that they didn't like it. So, I mean, guys like you and me and most guys would be totally fine with the taste. And the amount of nutrition that's in that and the density of that makes it an awesome food for things like special ops guys or even NASA. I mean, there's a lot of nutrition in that little bag right there. So
it's stunning to me how much like mouth pleasure factors into people's lives. Like,
absolutely.
I don't like the taste. Well, something could be fantastic for you. Like I expect that out of my 7-year-old. You know, she's like, it tastes gross. I don't like it. I'm like, I get it. You're 7.
Well,
but out of a 37-year-old, Jesus Christ.
90% of people really eat. It's a pleasurable thing to them, and they don't want to restrict that in any way, shape, or form.
Well, that's crazy to me because you don't have to restrict it. Just for the most part, take in healthy nutrients. And things like this is not bad. Like, Jesus Christ, if this is the most suffering you get in a day, talk about first world problems. You know, these little energy bits, man, they weren't the best thing I've ever had. I don't know what I'm going to do now. It's not bad. It's not bad at all.
I mean, I see from the general consumer point of view, like I could see maybe, but once they know the science behind it, like the CEO sent me a stack of research papers and they're all off of PubMed. And I started looking through them and then double checking on PubMed and realizing there's a lot of science behind this. And actually NASA was interested in algae and making capsules because it's super high in protein, has all these phytonutrients, and you can grow it. You could figure out a way to grow it in space and stuff. So I think really that's the future. Like things like keto cookie will be a gateway for people to say, okay, maybe I can go on this diet and I can have these chocolate chip cookies here too. But then eventually your palate changes over time, and you don't crave those foods anymore. Like I don't crave.
That's never happened to me. No. It's gotten close, but man, I smell some fresh bread or a bowl of pasta like linguine with clams. I'm in, man.
But you can maybe control yourself a little bit better. Yeah, you still crave it. I don't actually crave that at all. I will
good
crave
at controlling myself.
Sweets and chocolate, maybe sometimes, or
ice cream.
Not so much. I was a big ice cream guy.
They have
keto
keto ice cream though, don't they? Yeah, Chris Bell.
Do. Oh, yeah.
Chris Bell was eating some on his Instagram.
So the institute that I'm associated with, the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, IHMC, it's run by the director is Ken Ford. He was a former director in NASA, executive in NASA. And they have a James Beard award-winning chef that they hired into IHMC. And he has a specific keto ice cream recipe, which is using MCT and like a pinch of stevia. And when you eat the ice cream, I mean, it just blows your mind that this is ice cream that you could eat every day, a big bowl, and stay on a ketogenic diet.
Wow.
So these kinds of innovative, I call this like innovative.
You feel like you're eating ice cream?
Oh yeah. It's like really legit. Like my wife, she's really like the litmus test. So when I get products, I give, the last product I got was the Keto Brownie. So if you like Google Keto Brownie, it'll come up. And, I give it to my wife, and she was like, yeah, this is pretty good. But it had like a shell in it, which kind of got caught on her teeth or whatever. And she loved the taste, but it was a little bit, I think because she's so picky, it was like, oh, I liked it, but it just had a shell in it or whatever. But Keto Brownie is like another food. And I see all these entrepreneurial guys kind of emerging on the scene and being very innovative in the way. I mean, it takes a long time to develop and test a product that you can eat that's low carb, for one thing, and then that you could allows you to adhere to a ketogenic diet.
Have you had a cave shake? You know what those are?
I've heard about it.
Local California company. Got a bunch in the fridge back there.
Yeah?
Oh,
maybe I can try one.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
100%. I'll give you one right now if you want one. But we'll wait till after the show. But yeah, I'm big on those, man. Those are giant. They're made with a lot of good stuff in there, but I think a lot of it is coconut milk. And, this keto ice cream company, what's it called again?
Yeah, actually, there's not a company that I know of yet. It's just... I told them they need to create some IP around this formula, but it was the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. The chef there,
he cooked it up himself.
Yeah, he has a number of recipes because the CEO there, Ken Ford. I mean, he's a huge fan of the ketogenic diet, and it's how I got hooked up with him because he realizes that it enhances his cognition and performance, and has actually been a big help in moving things, into government agencies and helping them acknowledge that this is a very viable form of way to fuel the astronaut or fuel the special ops guy. So he's been kind of instrumental in that regard, and he has, hired a chef that cooks ketogenic and in a gourmet fashion, a James Beard award-winning chef,
wow.
which I didn't even know what that was and then I looked it up and I was like, whoa, these are very high-level chefs that are specifically, and his expertise, at least at the Institute, is to create these ketogenic recipes that are like ultra gourmet and amazing to eat. So,
what about pasta? Is there like an almond flour based pasta?
Not that I've tried a lot of things, but I would hesitate to recommend anything just because I have not been impressed enough to really. There's some protein pasta out there that's a little bit low carb, but a lot of times they kind of fill you up with a lot of soluble fiber, and you just become like a gas machine. It might be good for your gut microbiome in some ways, but you're feeding all the bugs in there. But for a large part, like if you get we have a certain threshold for soluble fiber, which gets broken down into butyrate and other things in the gut. And if you exceed that, you just become, a gas machine. And
so maybe it would be good in like a small side dish.
Yeah.
Like a little side.
So that's your weakness then?
Pasta.
Right? So and ice cream too? Or?
No, I mean, I can go without ice cream. I'm fine. Sweets really don't get me that much. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It's not something I massively crave, but I am a big fan of spaghetti.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
I think that it's just one of those things where I bet if I just stop taking it for a long time, stop eating it for a long time, but that's been my cheap food for a while.
Yeah.
So if I just cut it out of my system completely for like 6 months or something like that, I probably...
there's a book that has ice cream. There's a recipe. Jeff Volek has a book. It's called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. And this will appeal to your crowd because a lot of MMA guys, I refer the book and they say this book was incredibly helpful to me. So The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. And there's there may be a pasta recipe in there. I know there's an ice cream recipe in there. That's not unlike the recipe I was just talking about. So, but the pasta thing, that would be, if someone could nail that down, that would be pretty good technological achievement.
Right? It'd probably be filled with some weird stuff that make it taste like pasta.
You were just in Italy, right? I saw some pictures. Whereabouts? And did you have pasta and pizza? When
I
you
went off like a rocket. Yeah, I got way off the diet.
I do that. When I was in Naples, you got to have pizza. That was quite a while ago. But, it's moderation too. So
well, they also have different flour. And I talked to...
yes, they do. That's right.
Maynard Keenan from the band Tool also has an osteria, a restaurant, and a vineyard that he runs in Arizona. He's a weird guy. But he explained on the podcast rather that I did with him recently the difference between the pasta that we have today and the bread we have today and original heirloom wheat, which is it's lower yield per acre, and it has less complex glutens in it.
Yeah.
And he's like, that is when people are talking about like the difference between how your body tolerates like certain gluten, whether it's gluten sensitivity or not. He's like, it's just a different feel. And I really noticed that when I was in Italy, like when I would eat their pasta, I mean, it tastes different. It feels different when it's going down. And I actually ordered a bunch of it from Italy. And I even cooked it at home, and I noticed the difference.
And did you get any, you don't have any, so if I go, which I don't, if I go to the movie, sometimes I'll get popcorn, and I'm completely okay, like eating popcorn, and then, a day or two later, I'm back into ketosis really fast, without even exogenous ketones. But if I do eat pizza or pasta, which I did in the beginning when I would have like these cheat meals occasionally, I would have some major GI issues because your body's, digestion, assimilation, transport of these things you're typically eating on a day-to-day, and then you go without eating them, and it's like your body doesn't know what to do with it. But when I did go to Italy, and we travel around all over the place, my wife loves to travel, and we were in Naples, and I ate maybe 2 or 3 pieces of pizza. I had absolutely no problems, whereas that in the U.S., that would have bothered me. And maybe it was just, it may have been the flour. Like
I guarantee you it's the flour. It's just a different kind of flour. I think it's called double O flour. See if you can find that, Jamie. the flour that they use, and they'll specify for imported wheat flour from Italy that it's a special type of flour, and that flour is essentially heirloom flour. So the difference between like when you buy a tomato from the grocery store and it's pale and bulletproof and you can throw it down a flight of stairs and it doesn't even get bruised, versus heirloom tomatoes, which are almost like a fruit. I mean, it really is essentially a fruit. And they're juicy and very delicate and very very fragile as well. There it is. Is double O flour worth the price? Well, that's a...
I just pulled up one that had the name in it somewhere.
Got it. Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, that's my big problem. But if someone does do that, if they follow a ketogenic diet and they eat a bowl of pasta, I can't help it, and then they take exogenous ketones and it knocks them back into ketosis, will it stay that way even though the body digests that pasta and they'll be in ketosis again tomorrow?
A good question. It won't. It'll stay that way based upon the pharmacokinetic properties of the supplement you're consuming. So a ketone salt product, the ones that are on the market, if it's mixed with a fat like medium chain triglyceride, the Keto OS system and the ketogenic system are BHB and MCT, you'll be sustained for longer. But if you do choose to try to get the benefits of ketones and you're on a carbohydrate-based diet, you have to consume obviously more exogenous ketones to get the benefits of ketones.
But you could do that though. So someone could
theoretically do that.
Eat sandwiches and just take exogenous ketones and maintain pretty much the exact benefits.
And you can do that. And a lot of people are kind of confused. They're like, well, what's the body going to do with the glucose? Or what's the same thing? You could say the same thing if you eat fat. What's the body going to do with the glucose? Well, interestingly, glucose goes down, and we don't actually know why. We think the liver kind of sends out less, and these products are just not really like a huge amount of ketones, right? It's just enough to get you maybe into the 1 millimolar range, and we know that's enough to give your brain like a boost and give 1 millimolar of ketones in your blood actually represents a pretty significant source of energy that your brain can use and that your heart can use. We know the heart runs more efficiently off ketones, and probably more importantly is that the ketones function as signaling molecules that inhibit anti-inflammatory processes. So Deep Dixit at Yale University did a study actually with one of the ketones.
Wait a minute, what's his name?
His name is Deep Dixit.
Jesus Christ.
I never thought about it, Now he's got a...
You've never thought of that?
I never,
That's the difference between a scientist and a comedian right there. I'm like, wait a minute. Hold up.
I always look at his Indian name, but he always tells me to call him Deep. But
just call me Deep Dixit, sorry.
He's a really good scientist and the leader in studying the effects of calorie restriction and ketones, and he observed that elevating ketones has a signaling-like effect completely independent of the metabolic effect, which everybody thinks of ketones are a source of energy, but they are also like a hormone. They're like a drug. So they hit specific pathways. The pathway that he found at the study at Yale was the NLRP3 inflammasome. You don't have to know that, but when that inflammasome is activated, it releases a lot of inflammatory cytokines in the body, and that inflammasome is linked to a lot of age-related chronic diseases too. So as we age, we have more systemic chronic inflammation. So I always say the people that can benefit most from the ketogenic diet, you tend to get more insulin resistant and more trunk obesity, as we age. So they are people that will be more receptive to the benefits of the ketogenic diet as we age. We become more carbohydrate intolerant as we age. But anyway, it's the beta hydroxybutyrate is functioning as an anti-inflammatory, like independent of the energy pathways. So he established that. And it was actually a diet that I helped him formulate with exogenous ketones. And after that got published, I got a number of emails from pharmaceutical companies because they wanted to sort of reverse engineer something that had the same effect as a ketone, but to put it into a drug. And that was there's a pretty intense interest in the signaling properties of ketones in pharmaceutical companies, especially histone deacetylase inhibitors. So beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the ketone you measure from your blood, functions as what we call this HDAC inhibitor, which affects genes. So you're actually turning on genes that are neuroprotective, that are cellular protective, that are linked to longevity pathways. So think about the rewards of developing a drug that did the same thing. But
the financial rewards.
You can't patent beta-hydroxybutyrate in different forms maybe.
It just shows you whenever something's good, someone comes along and tries to fuck with it.
Yeah. I mean, you could say it's, probably for the most part driven by greed, but there's a legitimate impact on human health and longevity.
But wouldn't that just be better suited for the diet?
Absolutely. I think it's awesome that our body makes this, natural metabolite. So the ketone salt products you buy on the market the ketones are derived from natural sources. So you are giving, you are elevating a bioidentical form of a ketone that your body makes. There's a little bit of the debate because there's the D form of beta-hydroxybutyrate and the L form. So we call that racemic. If they're together, they're racemic. And the D form is kind of what your body makes, but it can also convert it to the L in certain tissues, and it can get really complicated. The important thing is that the salts that you consume that are commercially available, the D form is more likely to be broken down and utilized as a source of energy, whereas the L form probably sticks around more within the cell. And we know the L form actually also functions in the signaling roles. So the L form has anti-inflammatory effects. The L form, hits these signaling pathways. So the racemic mixtures that are in the salts may have extra benefits over just a pure D form because the L form can kind of hang around and stimulate all these pathways we know are beneficial before it gets broken down into fuel.
So there might be some sort of a benefit for people even on a strict ketogenic diet of taking exogenous ketones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And I think, we work really closely with the Charlie Foundation, and I think the ketogenic diet should never be replaced with exogenous ketones at this point because the research is not there yet to validate it. But we want to go in that direction because there's some kids who really, they're fat intolerant. They throw up when they eat the ketogenic diet because it's too high in fat. And a proportion of the kids are like that. Most kids can follow it. But even for childhood cancers and stuff, I met with the Max Love Project. He was on Jimmy Kimmel. Max, he was a child with a brain tumor that is, his family is treating them with a ketogenic diet, and they help many families around the area, and they have a foundation. Just Google Max Love Project. And his family is helping Max adhere to and stick to a ketogenic diet as an adjuvant to his standard of care. So not a replacement. The ketogenic diet does work remarkably well for some people as maybe a standalone therapy for cancer and has anti-cancer effects, but as an adjuvant to the standard of care, it's remarkably effective. And they're working with, I think with Orange County, yeah. So they have a lifestyle medicine program at Children's Hospital in Orange County where they're helping a wide variety of families who have kids with cancer stick to and adhere to a ketogenic diet as part of a wellness program after they went through their cancer treatment. Because if you're a child and you get the standard chemotherapy, you are kind of left in a situation where you're far more likely to have a lot of different negative health consequences after that, because the chemotherapy wipes out your immune system and can create, additional mutations. So there's kind of like a fallout from the standard of care. And being on a ketogenic diet can be cellular protective, can help you as a neoadjuvant and after, before standard of care and even after standard of care, help you recover and get your body back into like a detoxified state, if you want to use that term.
That's amazing. Now, how many cancer research places are adopting this? I mean, it seems like that would be gigantic, and this is a big shift over to standard care of just a few years ago, right? Yeah.
So the idea is, and we wrote a grant with the Moffitt Cancer Institute, which is a tier 1 cancer research center. I mean, they essentially reached out to us and say there's significant interest in this from the National Cancer Institute and National NIH, National Institutes of Health, to use the ketogenic diet as an adjuvant at this point instead of replacing standard of care, which only in situations where the standard of care is not effective should that be the case, but as an adjuvant to further enhance the efficacy of the standard of care. So the ketogenic diet, we know, limits glucose availability to the tumor, which requires the glucose for growth and proliferation. It decreases insulin, I talked about, and insulin signaling drives cancer growth, and it also elevates ketones. And ketones may have an anti-cancer effect, and for the most part, especially in very aggressive tumors that have dysregulated mitochondria, they can't use the ketones for fuel nearly as well as they do like fuels like glucose and maybe even glutamine, amino acid. So it enhances the standard of care and helps them, actually protects them from the healthy cells from the radiation damage from the standard. It sensitizes the tumor to radiation and kills off more tumor, and it protects your healthy cells. So my colleague, Adrian Scheck at the Barrow Neurological Institute, has done some remarkable work in animal models showing this, and that has translated into a human study and actually garnered more interest in this area to use the ketogenic diet as an adjuvant. I think in some cases where the standard of care has failed for glioblastoma or advanced metastatic cancer, I think the ketogenic diet can kind of be a base therapy for a more comprehensive metabolic-based program. And we wrote an article called The Pressed Pulse, where the ketogenic diet and maybe something like metformin and other drugs can be used to weaken the cancer and limit its fuel source. And then you can kind of come in with maybe more aggressive ways like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which can reverse tumor hypoxia, or various low-dose chemo regimens. So you weaken the cancer, you put your body into a state of ketosis, and then you come in and pulse at predetermined time points, maybe every 3 weeks, a therapy in a much lower dosing regimen to gradually knock down and reduce the tumor volume over time. And you do it in a more gradual way instead of going in there, with surgery, radiation, and chemo, which is kind of like slash and burn, and it leaves the patient. The patient coming out of that therapy is much, much weaker than when they came in. So a therapy can be developed that when the patient comes in and they come out the other side, they're actually in more robust health. We know that they can, we can do that.
That's incredible.
That's possible from a theoretical standpoint, with various research being done in animal models and what we know about nutrition and physiology. That can be done. It's just going to take some time to do it.
It's just so interesting when you talk about the shift of information. I mean, when you were in college being fat phobic, to now being like one of the premier guys that's out here preaching the benefits of the ketogenic diet, and then seeing, this, up until really recently, cancer research always depended upon these, chemotherapy and radiation and all these different standards that everyone's been having success with. But the idea that you could actually make a person healthier through the ketogenic diet and hyperbaric chambers and things along those lines, it's amazing. It's just...
hyperbaric oxygen therapy actually is FDA approved for things like radiation necrosis. Like when you have radiation, on a tumor, you have a lot of necrotic tissue, and patients would undergo hyperbaric oxygen for radiation necrosis. And, I would go to these various conferences over the years and talk to these physicians, and these patients would make remarkable recoveries, even after they have the therapy. And it seemed like something else was going on here. And if I go back early in my work, I mentioned that we developed these technologies through our work with the Department of Defense and when the Office of, where we build a hyperbaric chamber, and then we buy an off-the-shelf microscope and install it inside the chamber, and then we close it up, and then we pressurize it to simulate, what a dive would be while we're looking at the mitochondria and even the cells. And I did that with like healthy cells and neurons, and we did it with a glioblastoma cell line, and we noticed that the cells were exploding with high levels of oxygen. I didn't know what I was seeing at the time, but I looked into it more and started contacting some of the leaders in the field, and they reported, one of them was Thomas Seyfried in Boston College, and he was a neurogenetics professor at Yale University, and then had moved to Boston to expand a ketogenic diet program for cancer. And he told me, what you're observing is damaged mitochondria from cancer cells, which have damaged mitochondria, and if you give them more oxygen, it will produce proportionally more reactive oxygen species. And that oxidative stress would essentially trigger necrosis and apoptosis in the cells. So there'd be all the cell death at a level of oxygen that was relatively non-toxic to the healthy cells. So, and then we did some work with ketones and saw that ketones were stopping the growth of cancer too. So we had this idea of using, nutritional ketosis plus hyperbaric oxygen and studying that in a mouse model of cancer. And we've got some remarkable results that we published. And this is, patients are doing this kind of in an off-label way. They're doing the ketogenic diet. But now we have, if we go to clinicaltrials.gov and you just look up ketogenic diet, you see more than a dozen studies. So when I got into this, there was no studies. So now there's been an interest in even maybe people like jumping on the bandwagon of, if they have a particular drug, will the ketogenic diet enhance it? Or let's see if it enhances the standard of care, or let's see where standard of care failed, if we can get these patients on this metabolic therapy and see if we can help them with quality of life.
It's so exciting. I mean, it's just really amazing, exciting stuff. It's so interesting seeing something like this emerge, relatively late.
Yeah.
In terms of like medicine and science. I mean, 2017, we were talking about something that's diet.
Yep. So just if you Google like ketogenic diet in a Google search around 2012, it's down here, and something happened around 2013 or 14 where it just skyrocketed.
What was that? Do you know?
I have no idea. I mean, I was on Tim Ferriss and other things, but a lot of my colleagues
When were you on Tim's show?
Probably dating back like to 2014.
That's probably
maybe
it.
20. That could be it, but it's really my
For
colleagues.
sure.
I mean, there's so
you're
many.
Being humble. Stop
well,
it. I'm sure your colleagues have a lot to do with it, but as far as like the impact of the reach of something, a podcast, the impact that a podcast has in terms of like the amount of people that are going to Google something is probably many, many magnitudes greater than anything anybody is doing, and from a professor or some fellow
I realize
scientist.
That now.
Yeah.
So, and I thank you for letting
pleasure.
me have this platform. But
I'm excited.
I almost feel like there's guys like the guy that got me into this was Dr. Jung Roh, and he was at Barrow Neurological Institute. He mentored my colleague Adrian Scheck into looking at ketones for glioblastoma. He runs the pediatric center in Calgary right now. But Dr. Eric Kossoff from Johns Hopkins was a big help to me. A number of people, I feel like they should have this platform, but they're so busy they don't do podcasts. But I realized early on it was really important to get the message out, because it does no good, if you're not hitting a big target. And what I focused on was not just one application, but I mean, we do everything from wound healing to these genetic diseases to cancer to various seizure disorders. So I realized this was a lot bigger than just pediatric epilepsy. And
it's great. It sounds like it's the only way you should eat.
It is. I mean, I don't, tell everybody they should eat ketogenic, but I definitely feel that they should at least go into ketosis a couple times a year, if not for just longevity effects, for anti-inflammatory effects. When things pop up and we're under stress, like I had an email yesterday, a person had severe shingles or severe outbreaks of even the fever blisters or something like that, or cold sores. And if they just fast and do the ketogenic diet, it suppresses that. Or if since they've been on the ketogenic diet, they had, profound suppression of some viral disorders that when there's viral shedding and you're affected by the virus, it causes profound inflammation and neuroinflammation. So it kind of starts with a headache, and then it will kind of lead to the itchiness or whatever associated with shingles. But they described it very elegantly in an email, and it was very clear, before and after, since they've been doing the ketogenic diet, had a profound effect, even more so than the antiviral drugs that they're taking. So even something like HIV, which contributes to neuroinflammation and even different types of cancers like Kaposi sarcoma, I think, being in a state of nutritional ketosis could probably offer a lot of benefits to HIV patients that really struggle, with some symptoms that are associated with, inflammation and other things associated. So this is another path we're going into. So some of those researchers have reached out to us and say, hey, the NIH has a proposal for this. Let's write a grant together. So I'm in it's crazy because I only have so much of a bandwidth, but people from Ivy League institutions are reaching out to me and saying, hey, can you help us formulate a ketogenic diet, or can we use your ketone supplement to do a study on things that I never thought, nutritional ketosis would be applied to.
Now, what about wound healing? You brought up wound healing.
Yeah. that's a big one. One of my students, Dr. Shannon Kessel, she actually works for the Epigenics Foundation now, helping the dogs at the Keto Pet Sanctuary. She did her Ph.D. on the effects of ketones on a wound healing model. And the model that we use was essentially, the back of a rat. Hopefully there's, animal protection people. But in describing what we do, we basically have a wound that's a pretty nasty wound on the back of a rat where one side is ischemic, it lacks significant blood flow, and the other side is non-ischemic, and then which has normal blood flow. And there's like a chunk of tissue kind of taken out. And then we look to see how fast that wound closes up, right, over time. And we do it in young animals and we do it in aged animals. And we take animals and then we feed them a standard rodent chow, which is high carbohydrate rodent chow. And then we have a number of different groups where we give them various types of ketone supplements. And we found that admitted that the ketone supplements enhance the wound healing, not only in the aged, which was pretty remarkable, and ischemic, but also in the young had a benefit. So it was like for the young, healthy guy that has a cut or a wound on the battlefield or something like that, it can help that wound heal up faster. And it's doing it through a variety of mechanisms. Probably the wound itself is often the wound tissue is deficient in ATP, the energy source, because the blood can't get to it, right? So the ketones can restore, like 90% of it has 90% less ATP in some cases with ischemic wounds. The ketones have the ability to, like, we think, thin out the blood and be able to get to that wound tissue that's lacking oxygen and blood flow. And not only does it restore the energy to the wound healing, which can allow cells to replicate and heal up the wound faster, but I talked about the anti-inflammatory effects. So persistent chronic inflammation can prevent the wound from healing up, and by suppressing some of the inflammatory pathways, that can kind of open the gate on the activity of various growth factors and healing processes that can heal the wound up. And it seems to be, pretty profound in the age, but also happens in the young.
Now, this is just taking exogenous ketones?
Yeah. And it's not even
standard chow from rodents?
Standard chow. So we didn't want to kind of, messy up the data in any way. We actually should have done, if we had the funding, we could have done a ketogenic diet plus ketone supplementation.
And you think that would be even better?
Yeah, I definitely think it would, because the ketogenic diet alone suppresses some of these inflammatory components that is associated with impaired wound healing, especially impaired wound healing in like a diabetic model.
Right.
So I talked about hyperbaric oxygen therapy. The main application is that is for diabetic wounds that just don't heal up because the oxygen and glucose doesn't get to it. So in the diabetic wound, the problem is that it's really a blood flow problem, and we did. To answer that question, to determine if it was blood flow, we did a Doppler blood flow analysis of the blood flow into wound and showed that it was something like a 25 or 30% increase in blood flow to the wound when we induced acute ketosis. So we gavaged.
That's incredible.
We stimulate, ketosis that would mimic ketogenic diet or fasting, and then we do a Doppler blood flow analysis, and we show a pretty remarkable increase in blood flow.
That's a huge increase.
Yeah.
That seems like that would be the move for someone who's recovering from some sort of a surgery or something like that. Hyperbaric chamber.
Yeah.
Combined with ketosis, ketogenic supplements.
And for the VA, my collaborator on this project, Dr. Lisa Gould, at one time she was the president of the Wound Healing Society. And I mean, even she was like, this is really remarkable. I mean, to have someone of her stature, she's an MD, Ph.D., really comment that this is profound, effect on wound healing, really motivated us to follow up on this. But we have not gotten funding after this, so we really need to keep working because we need to follow up on this study and get this as a legitimate wound healing. A lot of people are trying to enhance the wound healing process by putting things on the wound, but wound healing is enhanced if you alter and optimize your metabolic physiology. That promotes, substrate and oxygenation to the wound, and that's what ketones do. I mean, you have a vasodilation effect. There's a big increase in adenosine. Adenosine is a pretty profound vasodilator. So you have a vasodilation that's improving blood flow to the area where there's not only glucose in there, but there's ketones. And the ketones help restore the energy in that wound that is sufficiently depressed from lack of blood flow, and it's promoting or reducing a lot of the inflammatory things that preventing it from healing in the first place. So, yeah, I mean, this was really like, it was presented at the Wound Healing Society, and a lot of people were floored by it. So Shannon has, my student has went and moved on and doing postdoctoral, work at another place, but I really need to follow up on that. We have a lot of projects, we're trying to process in parallel right now. But yeah, I need another student to, because that may have been, that and, some of the motor function, glucose lowering, and anti-anxiety effects are all things that kind of jumped out of the data from us that I never would have expected. I came in this to look at seizures.
Now, what was the hard data in terms of what is the percentage of increase in healing across the board with the rats?
So if we look at time for that wound to close and heal up, it's about 20 to 25%.
That's significant. So that mirrors the amount of blood flow that you were talking about. The increase in blood flow being about 20%.
It does. I don't know if you could draw a direct correlation to that, but obviously if you have improved blood flow, that's getting nutrition to the wound. And we know that blood has ketones in it, which have anti-inflammatory effects and things like, it stimulates the HDAC 1 and 2, which stimulates superoxide dismutase and other antioxidant enzymes, which are often dysregulated, at the wound site. So it's doing a lot of, not only just restoring oxygenation and blood flow, but it's having drug-like effects. These metabolites are really signaling molecules, and it makes sense. If we're in a state of starvation ketosis, the ketones would have, be telling the brain to do certain things and altering different neuropharmacological pathways that should be altering our, behavior in ways. You don't want to, the person that is deprived of food and becomes tired from hypoglycemia and is the person that's going to die. So the people that survived in the absence of food availability were the ones that became more lucid and clear and were able to go and forage or hunt down the animal and kill it and eat it. So we are hardwired. I mean, to answer your question, I think a while back you asked, why do we have ketones? Why? I think it's an evolutionarily hardwired system that is just built into our DNA. And, with the advent of carbohydrates and frequent feedings and, a deli on every corner here, we've largely silenced that genetic program that becomes activated upon food deprivation that can stimulate a host of beneficial things, from extension of longevity to autophagy. And I know Rhonda Patrick, I'm a big fan of her. She's talked about this quite a lot.
Yeah, she's awesome.
And she's super awesome. She actually visited the lab and we did a podcast with her at our lab. Yeah, she
scares the shit out of me. Every time I talk to her, I'm like, I'm basically a monkey that knows the same language as her.
She's like an encyclopedia of information. So and she always comes prepared. So I came prepared. I was like, I should do what Rhonda does. So I wrote down some notes here. There's probably things I'll forget. But yeah, so yeah, it's a system that typically was activated in the normal person,
during periods of
millennia
hunger.
ago. Yeah, and
which actually enhanced your concentration.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things to go back to the hunting thing. My friend Remy Warren, who's a pretty famous hunter, and one of the things that he says, and he's always said this, that he likes to hunt hungry. And one of the things he does these backcountry hunting trips solo. Yeah. And he purposely brings too little food.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he's found over his many years is that when he is actually hungry, he is more tuned in and he does a better job of understanding what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. The first time I actually started experimenting with fasting or even a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet, I took a walk around my neighborhood at the time, and it's like my whole nostrils opened up. I could smell things. I could hear things. I was more lucid in ways I had not been before. I even fasted for 7 days and was able to, give a lecture and train in the gym and lift weights that were not hardly much lower than what I typically do. So I probably couldn't do, it was just at 7-day point after no calories. I was starting to feel...
No calories at all?
No calories after 7 days.
Just water?
Just water and some a bouillon cube, so some electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and lots of water. And I allow myself about a third of the coffee that I would typically drink. So I'd have a small cup of coffee in the morning. And I got a ton of stuff done during that week. Like I had, because I didn't have to to make my food. I didn't have to clean up my food. I didn't have time eating the food. So I saved a lot of time. I think I lost 8 to 9 pounds, and then within a week or two, it all came back again. A lot of it's you're holding glycogen and you lose glycogen. But in regards to, at the time, like my deadlift strength was maybe 8 or 10 reps with like 565, and I was able to do 10 easy reps with 5 plates on each side, which is about 500. And typically going into this, I was paranoid. When I was, I listened to Dorian Yates's podcast, and I was a huge follower of Dorian Yates in 1994. And I was eating 4 to 6 meals a day with shakes in between. And I remember even having like nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the nightmare. Like the nightmare would be I didn't have like food on me after 2 hours. Like I would have to eat like every 2 hours. I was so obsessed with getting bigger and stronger. And so for me to fast 7 days and to be out of my comfort zone, that was like a big step for me. So I kind of just did it to mentally liberate myself from chronic overfeeding and things. And because I had just read and studied George Cahill and the Harvard Medical School study where they fasted for 40 days and looking at, all the parameters on that. And I was like, it's not going to kill me. It's probably going to do me well. And the more I did it, the second and third day were kind of hard for me. But after like the 5th day, it was bizarre. It became like really easy. And I was just kind of like floating around, like my body had no inflammation. I wasn't buzzing like with energy, but I was very lucid, and I didn't feel like I needed to be buzzed. Like I realized I'm so much better. A lot of times I feel like I need to drink coffee to amp up to be my best, but I was my best when my brain was really calm and I was able to put thoughts together, and I wrote a whole lot of research proposals, which later became funded, and I got probably, of the proposals I really worked on, I probably got over $1 million of funding during that time. I really intensely worked on various proposals because I just transitioned into like a tenure track position. So it allowed me to work on manuscripts and proposals and just put thoughts together that maybe I otherwise either wouldn't have the time to or the mental kind of resources to get into that.
That seems so counterintuitive that you have more mental resources with less calories.
It does. I mean, I was burning my body fat for fuel primarily, probably lost a little bit of muscle, but that fat was becoming ketones, and that my brain had switched over. I was doing low carb, but not really full keto at the time. But it like quieted my brain in a way that I was able to really, maybe I have like mild, ADHD because I like to do so many different things, but it quieted my mind, and I was able to wake up, like every morning I was waking up a lot earlier than normal, like 4:35, and I typically sleep till like 7, but I was able to like wake up and just focus and get a ton of work done the first 3 or 4 hours. And then I would go into work actually and just, meet with my students or teach or do whatever I had to do. But I just remember getting a ton of work done during that period. I've never reproduced it. I never went back, but I did a whole bunch of blood work on me to give, a little bit of insight as to what's going on during the fasting stage, and everything was really positive. There was a big, my insulin was really low at the time. My glucose was really low. I got down to like 25 at one point because I was experimenting with a couple different things, and my ketones were really high. My ketones were like double what my glucose was at a couple time points during that. So it's an issue. I would encourage people, especially maybe people that are prone to cancer or people who have had cancer in the past and maybe had treated and are kind of in a state of remission. If you get your body into that, what we call the metabolic zone, where the level of ketones are higher than the level of glucose, that puts tremendous metabolic stress on cancer cells or precancerous cells that have a huge appetite for glucose. So, and that can initiate autophagy.
So even people who do not have cancer, but perhaps want to just make sure they're holding off of it as a preventative maintenance.
Yep. And I think it can stimulate, almost purge your body of cancer cells that are weakened in this fasted state, and also precancerous cells that may be in the transition of de-differentiating into this, cancer-like cell. These cells are very energy demanding, especially if they're replicating. And if you deprive them of energy, the quote-unquote energy crisis signal that these cells receive can initiate programmed cell death. We call apoptosis and autophagy. And that's the benefit of this. It's almost like housekeeping. So think about it, you accumulate a lot of, dead cells that are kind of sluggish, your mitochondria are kind of sluggish, and then you fast for a week and it's like reboot. It's like it's like a reset button.
Wow.
So
I did a podcast with Rob Wolf where he was talking about this one guy
podcast.
who went for a whole year without eating. Have you paid attention to that case?
Not only did I pay attention to it, I've presented that at a number of different meetings, and people say bullshit, but it's actually it's in oh man, I think I may have had it. I was going to actually show it at this meeting, but I think I took the slide out. I had it in the back.
Let's just tell people what this guy did. Not only did he lose
382 days.
Not only did he lose a tremendous amount of weight, he went from being morbidly obese to being like a normal-sized person. But here's the big one: the skin shrank.
Yeah,
too,
that's right.
Normally, when
to the most part,
for the most part.
Yep.
I mean, significantly. Where most people have to, when you're that big and you shrink down to a normal-sized person, they have to cut your skin, or you just walk around like a flying squirrel.
Yeah.
I mean, you have like this crazy extra skin, right?
Yeah.
Well, this guy somehow or another, through this 380 plus days of fasting, his body shrank accordingly.
Yeah, that's right. So
That's
he was about
amazing.
500 pounds. Actually, Travis Christofferson and I wrote a blog article, and it was part 1, 2, and 3, the history of the ketogenic diet, part 1, 2, and 3, and it's on Rob Wolf's website. So if you just Google the history of the ketogenic diet and land on Rob's website, you'll have, I think we talk about the story in there. It's a remarkable story. Yeah, the guy was like 500 pounds, and he fasted for like 381 days or 82 days. And he went down to 190 pounds. And the remarkable thing is that he sustained that over, I mean, he maybe went back up like 5 or 6 pounds, but largely sustained that weight loss.
That's incredible.
Over time. So he was running completely off fat, the fat that he had, stored up. And he was studied pretty intensely. And the thing that came out of the data was there was a pretty significant drop in magnesium. So that actually convinced me, I definitely should probably maybe supplement magnesium if I was
supplementing
fasting.
anything? Any vitamins or?
They did give him an electrolyte, so it's in the medical records, and I dug into this as much as we could. His glucose levels got down to like 20 or 25 a couple times and maintained it.
He was given potassium tablets to keep his heart healthy and multivitamins every day.
Yep.
Have you ever done, is it Rob's? No, it's another website?
Yeah. I think I've seen this. But fasted 382 days.
Incredible. Lost 275.5 pounds. Now, who was calling bullshit on this?
Well, I did present it to like a mainstream, clinicians. Even
they were scoffing.
It's actually really fun. Like it might have been the American Epilepsy Society where they kind of marginalized the ketogenic diet, or it may have been another. It might have been
the
neurology.
American Epilepsy Society.
At the time, they're warming up to it just because the data, they can't turn their back on the data because data is data. So there's a massive amount of data emerging that this is grossly underutilized and should be really the standard of care, even the frontline therapy. Like we all kind of realize that, but neurologists would have to have, a sidekick, registered dietitian or whatever. But so during the time, one of my first presentations was to medical doctors, that were in it for CME credits and things like that, like just standard conventional. And I talked about, towards the end, I was like, well, I follow the ketogenic diet myself. And they're like gassed. They're like, oh, what's wrong with you? It's like when I explained to them that I was normal in the question answering after, they're like, well, why do you do it?
What year was
this? Like, are you okay? This is going back like 2009
That's
or 10.
Fairly recently.
Yeah.
7 years ago.
It was really bizarre to them that someone would actually follow the ketogenic diet. And I was doing like the classical, I was trying to do like the Hopkins protocol. I was using Eric Kossoff's book on the Hopkins.
So 98 and 2, is it?
I was about 80. I was a 3-to-1, so it was like 85 to 88% fat, and I was sticking to it. And so people really just think it's really bizarre if you don't have a severe neurological problem to be at the time. And now that's just evidence of how mainstream, because you see it in mass media, athletes going on quote unquote the ketogenic diet. I'd question whether they're actually ketogenic. They need to measure their ketones to really, so the ketogenic diet, you're in ketosis by the definition that your blood ketones are elevated above 0.5 millimolar. And typically most people, that's pretty hard to achieve. If you're up to 1 millimolar, which is like mild ketosis, you take 100 people out of the population that eat the standard American diet, maybe 1, maybe 2 people will achieve that if they like go all day without eating or something. Like it really takes a while to achieve that. So you have to be doing something pretty radical to achieve that blood measurement of state of ketosis. And
now,
once
are
you do that,
you seeing that in pro athletes a lot? I know there's a few fighters.
Yeah.
Misha Tate, before she retired, she went ketogenic. Her boyfriend Brian Caraway, I know he was ketogenic for a while.
Yeah.
That's just my experience with athletes. But I know that there's a lot of people that are looking at it.
Yeah, I would, kind of question whether they're like ketogenic. I'm sure they did low carb.
But if you eat too much protein, that converts to glucose.
It can kick you out.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, some athletes that contact me, their output is really high. So they're actually giving like 5 or 6 hours of output a day, and they're eating like 2 or 3 chocolate bars, and they're getting like 250 grams of carbs a day, some of them. And they're maintaining a mild state of ketosis, especially post-exercise ketosis, even with drinking something like the UCAN starch, like a slow burning, like a slow carb, like Tim Ferriss advocates, and they stay in ketosis. And then if they back off more, if they back their carbohydrates down to like 50 grams a day, they start to lose performance on that. I mean, these are people with very high output, though.
Ridiculous output.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, when you talk about 5 hours of exercise a day plus.
And they went from 1,000 grams of carbs a day to 250,
so
and they're performing
about,
better.
50 grams of carbs for the standard average person. This is not applicable for an MMA fighter who's doing 3 a days.
Yeah. I think you could, especially the older guys. Like older guys, I think you could readily adapt them. Like I said, though, I think that adaptation should probably occur during training in the off season and give themselves a buffer zone of 3 months. And actually work with a coach or work with an app like Avatar Nutrition or something where they calculate the macros and they actually know they're hitting the macros. And the body's amazing. If you actually hit the macros that are calculated, your body will go into ketosis. I've never seen, there's very few people that you can't get into ketosis, especially if you use things like, MCT and really adjust the macros. And you could also do ketogenic intermittent fasting, where you kind of don't eat throughout the day, but then eat through a window, or time-restricted eating, as Rhonda Patrick calls it, where you basically just eat within, a 6-hour window. And I like to do that. I'll eat from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. and just kind of eat a big meal and just kind of graze a little bit throughout, and then I get, a pretty good chunk of the time fasting. And then after I'm done with work, I'm not frantically running around trying to get stuff done, so I can relax, with my wife and just kind of kick back and eat and just, and that's kind of when I want to eat anyway.
So you feel like there's more of a benefit? I'm doing a 14-hour thing. You think there's even more benefit doing an 18?
I do. I think I don't. I do. For me, I definitely think I do, because there's something about like a couple hours extra where, like, if I fast for 14 hours but then go, like, my ketones really start to go up from 14 to 18 hours, and then I could actually stay in ketosis if I eat ketogenic during that 6 hours of eating. If I kind of pay attention to eating really low carb, like I can eat and before I go to bed test my ketones and bam, I'm hitting like 2.2 or something. So I continue to get the benefits of having ketones. But when it comes to like things like Rhonda talks about, like autophagy, I think you can even get more benefits with an 18-hour fast, and you do that. And you don't have to do it every day. I think you could just do it you could actually do it just like once, maybe twice a week, and get a lot of benefits from that. Like if you do that over the course of a year, and that's not hard to do, right? If you could just convince people, hey, take the breads and pastas out and just put in more vegetables and just do intermittent fasting, every Tuesday and Thursday. And if they do blood work after like 3 months, they're going to see a profound effect. Probably not even changing their diet. They're going to see a profound effect.
Now, someone told me that there is an effective way to measure ketones through breathing. There's some sort of a breath monitor. Is that real or?
Yeah, there's a couple out. Some of them were being showcased at the conference I was at, the Low Carb USA. The one that I have the most experience with is a product called Ketonics. And now they have a Bluetooth device out where you can blow into it and it reports to your phone, and it shows you the parts per million of acetone in there. And acetone, so you make beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate as the two primary ketone bodies that are used for fuel, and also they have signaling properties. And acetoacetate can break down, spontaneously decarboxylates to something called acetone, which you know is nail polish remover, right? So acetone actually has some really interesting brain effects that calms the brain down. Subnarcotic levels of acetone open potassium channels that, when potassium channels are opened, that hyperpolarizes the membrane potentials of neurons and makes them kind of more like charged batteries. And it also kind of calms your brain down so it's not firing action potentials as much. And that's a good thing. So but instead of all this kind of fluttering of activity, it helps to kind of synchronize your brain in a way by elevating. And this goes back to homeostasis, right? So that acetone can correlate with seizure control. So parents who have kids who do not like to get their fingers pricked have used the breath acetone. You blow into it, you get a pretty color. You know, the kids like it and everything. It is kind of hard to like set it up. You got to calibrate it, and so it's a little bit clunky to work with, but it's a pretty good indicator. If you're registering like orange or red on that, you are definitely in a state of ketosis. So, but I call it only semi-quantitative. So they need to work out some of the bugs. And if you just look up breath acetone meters, there's probably about 5 on the market now. And the one that I have experience with is called Ketonics. And if your acetone is high and you're not taking ketone supplements, you are cranking your fat metabolism. So you are really, mobilizing fat and burning fat for energy. So it's a pretty valid indicator.
So it's pretty good, but blood is the best.
Blood's the gold standard, probably will always be. There's technologies emerging out now, at least, small companies that are essentially you put a Band-Aid-like thing on your skin, and it's measuring glucose. It's measuring, potentially beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and things like lactate. And then it'll go to your smartphone. So you can look at your smartphone and see your glucose levels, your ketones, your lactate, and maybe some potentially other things. You could adjust your diet or drink a supplement to optimize you into a range maximizes your strength, maximizes your performance, or maximizes your brain protection in the extreme environment, like high pressure oxygen for a Navy SEAL or something like that. That technology is in development now and will probably surface sometime in the next year or two. And I think it'll be pretty cool. So think of a Dexcon, but instead of just glucose, it'll give you like a metabolomic profile of your blood. And then there'll be, you can augment it with your diet or with various supplements.
Now, I got 2 other important questions. One, physical performance. Have there been studies on reaction time, on all sorts of different variables that if you're looking at all this increase in blood flow, this decrease in inflammation, all those things are what you would want out of a body that you want to perform better. It seems like things would fire better, for lack of a better word. Have there been studies on putting athletes through a variety of stress tests, reaction times, things along those lines?
Those studies need to be done. Yeah. And I think some of the marketers out there that are promoting ketone supplements are based on some animal data, and I think they're extrapolating some of the effects. Well, ketones offer a metabolic advantage. You can generate more ATP. It gives your brain resilience under, inflammation or hyperglycemia. But the bottom line is that these studies need to be done and they need to be funded. Some of them are going on right now, and some of them I'm kind of involved in. And probably most important is, what are they actually studying? Like what ketogenic diet are they actually studying? Like what are the macronutrient ratios? Not only the ratios, but what types of fats are they using? What's their protein source?
Right.
And that's really important. And when it comes to ketone supplements, like that's a whole nother box of worms. I mean, are they using, just pure sodium beta hydroxybutyrate? Are they using like sodium, potassium, magnesium combination, which would offer more benefits? Are they using racemic versus a D enantiomer? Are they using a ketone ester? So there's like lots of these considerations. There's lots of nuances, in the way these things are formulated, in the way they're dosed, and in what type of application, whether it's a pure strength application or what I call strength performance, like push-ups and chin-ups and things like that, or endurance or ultra endurance or things like that. So a lot of research needs to be done. So I didn't really give you an answer, but I think the guy who's done the most research on this, clearly, at least with the ketogenic diet, is Jeff Volek from Ohio State University. His FASTER study clearly showed that athletes in a state of nutritional ketosis burn almost twice the amount of fat, and they maintain that, which is remarkable. I mean, does some elegant studies to show fat oxidation rates are like double of what we even thought were achievable when guys follow a well-formulated ketogenic diet. And he recently did a study using a ketone salt product showing that there was an enhancement of 8% performance in work output with a cyclist. So
that's a big number.
Yeah, 8% is pretty big.
8% for cyclists?
Yeah,
that's
gigantic. It might have been time to exhaustion. He just presented it here. And I didn't even know he had the data, actually. But, I mean, Jeff Volek is the leading researcher on, and he wrote the book, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, which a lot of MMA guys have benefited from because they email me. But these are studies that I'm really interested. I mean, we've done a lot of work in animal models, and now we're transitioning to human studies. We have a study at Duke University. So I mentioned oxygen toxicity to study this, in humans in these big environmental chambers at Duke. And then we do some stuff with NASA on the NASA NEEMO mission I was on. But we're really interested in moving a lot of these animal studies, which we've done. Now we're ready to move it into humans. But we still don't know what the optimal supplement is. And that's why Ketone Technologies, the company we developed, is really focused on identifying not the supplement that gives us the best margins for sales, but the supplement that's super optimized for particular applications.
Now, another question I wanted to ask you was about migraines. Now, I would assume that people with headaches, you take non-steroidal anti-inflammatories.
Yeah.
Someone with migraines, I mean, it would seem to me that would be something that might be able to help mitigate.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a student, I'm on her dissertation committee, Elena Gross, and she was a student, graduated from Oxford University, and is now doing a clinical trial on a ketone salts for migraines. So what motivated her to even pursue this as a PhD project is that she had crippling cluster migraine headaches. And she reached out to me, and she actually presented at our Metabolic Therapeutics conference. And that's her area of expertise. Like when it's happening to you personally, it motivates you in a way that you just immerse yourself in the research and you become like a leading expert. And I think at the very young age that Elena is, and she's got a great, background of education behind her, she's kind of the leading authority on nutritional ketosis for migraines, which is a growing field because a lot of people who had migraines that have contacted me and tried either the ketogenic diet or ketone supplementation have benefited from it when nothing else worked for them. And it doesn't work for everybody, but in some people that have these crippling headaches, it works better than anything that they've tried so far. And migraines, some of the data coming out, there's two sets of data that I've seen showing that migraines are linked to neuroinflammation. For example, if it's caused by a viral etiology, there's kind of swelling of the brain that leads to this kind of low systemic neuroinflammation, and maybe the ketones are working through an anti-inflammatory effects. Sometimes, like I said before, people get shingles or like a cold blister. They'll get like a headache throughout the day, and that's probably neuroinflammation. And then there's other data to show that these migraines actually may be like a mini seizure, like your brain is actually having a mini seizure that's not manifesting as a grand mal or tonic-clonic seizure or even an absent seizure, but it's presenting as a migraine, and it's seizure-like, I would say. So some of the data is indicating that, and ketones seem to be a viable strategy for for migraines from what I've seen, and that's why it's being studied right now.
The other question is, what about someone who's on a vegan diet?
Yeah, I get this a lot. I have a really close friend. She's vegetarian, Dr. Dawn Kernagas at Ihmc. We've talked about this a lot. For a vegetarian, it's relatively easy, right? Because you have dairy and you have eggs, and eggs are a huge staple. I buy the Happy Eggs, which actually taste a lot better. They're like the free-range eggs. But a vegan diet is a little more challenging. The Charlie Foundation's dietitian, Beth Zupackania is her name. If you go to the Charlie Foundation website, I think you may be able to find some information or a pamphlet that describes how to put together a vegan ketogenic diet. So there's no way that you can hit the macronutrient ratios of a ketogenic diet that's vegan unless it's in a shake form. So in this case, formulating a product that's more in a liquid form that you can drink is probably the way to go. If you do a vegan ketogenic diet, whole food, the best that you could do is really about maybe 60% fat, maybe 70% fat. And if you formulate the diet with coconut oil and MCT, that'll get your ketones up. And then if you consume, one of these various products on the market that are essentially medical foods or drinks that you can drink, you can stay in nutritional ketosis.
So it's a struggle.
It's possible, but it's much harder. People do it though, and they follow vegan for ethical reasons or for cultural reasons, and they've been able to do it.
But vegetarian is doable.
Vegetarian is very doable with eggs. If you can use eggs and dairy, I tend to minimize dairy in my diet, but yeah, so eggs are huge. So
you minimize dairy because of the effect it has on you, or
like a lot of dairy protein, like whey. It kind of started with whey protein, and I drank it for years, and maybe I just built up an allergy to it. But if I was to drink like a full shake of whey protein right now, it wouldn't agree with my gut. Although I can eat butter and I can eat sour cream, fine, no problem. And a lot of dairy protein, especially casein. If I eat not sour cream.
Cottage cheese?
Cottage cheese, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. That can start to irritate my gut a little bit. So I generally just minimize it. I do, like, cheese is kind of a weakness for me, so I might get a little bite of cheese here and there, like almost every day, even when I'm home. But I know dairy really was the cornerstone of the ketogenic diet with the original ketogenic diet, with what Johns Hopkins was formulating, because it's so easy and it tastes good. Right. But I do find that when people are following the ketogenic diet for weight loss and they kind of pull out the dairy, their fat loss increases. So I've observed that kind of anecdotally. I'm not sure if people have studied it, but if they just, for example, pull out the heavy cream and put in concentrated coconut milk, which I use for my heavy cream, which almost has a same cream-like consistency. And they take out the butter, maybe use more coconut oil, and just kind of switch out dairy for other things, their fat loss, and something about dairy in some people, not everybody, maybe causes them to retain water. It might be like a mild allergen. So for me, I'm okay with it as long as I kind of minimize it. But I've just heard so many stories. There's a case report now of a mother who had an autistic child and put them on a ketogenic diet and did remarkably well, and then made it dairy free. And it was really the dairy that was contributing to some of the symptoms. So I think, and this is in the medical literature, it's like on PubMed, she used a dairy-free ketogenic diet and had quote-unquote remission in an autistic child. I first saw it presented in an abstract at a meeting, and I was like, wow, I was really blown away. And then about a year later, it came out, and it was in a pretty good journal as a peer-reviewed publication and a pretty well-documented case report.
That's fascinating.
Putting an autistic child into remission with a ketogenic diet. So we talk about emerging applications. I know my colleagues, Dr. Jung Rowe and Dr. Susan Massino, are studying, and I mentioned this because I get so many emails about it, the ketogenic diet for autism. So I think
so many things are
could be the next frontier.
Inflammation.
Yeah, it could be linked to inflammation.
If diet, reduces inflammation, and if diet without dairy reduces inflammation further. Yeah. And I know a lot of people are having some great effects with CBD oils, which again reduce inflammation.
Something I'm very interested in. Yeah, I've talked to.
Inflammation is just such a giant factor in negative health consequences.
Yeah, ketogenic diet plus CBD plus hyperbaric oxygen therapy plus ketone supplementation is something that I wanted to study in a brain tumor model. I've just gotten too many emails from parents that have kids with epilepsy and also people who have cancer who use CBD oil, and they felt it was remarkably, effective for them. So I've talked with the CEO of Charlotte's Web and
I
other
use that
CBD.
stuff all the time. I've got it right here. Yeah, I take
I've never actually tried. Is that the Charlotte's? Is that their brand?
Yeah, Charlotte's Web.
So is this
Everyday Plus.
standardized for a certain level of THC? It's below a certain level?
Yeah.
Is each batch is standardized?
It doesn't get you high, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. Okay. So that was sort of the problem. I tried to do this work with our university, and then I need a DEA number, and it was like all the students had to have a DEA, and it became like so much red tape. But I'm going to revisit this project and
I'm
probably
sure they'll
reconnect
send you
with them.
Yeah, I'll try to connect you if you like.
Okay.
Because they're actually a sponsor of the podcast.
Really?
And yeah, they sent me a bunch of it, and I tried it out for a while before I took them on as a sponsor. I'm like, this stuff's legit.
Wow, yeah.
I read up about it. They use the whole plant as well.
Yeah.
So it has all the cannabinoids.
All the other cannabinoids, which I think is important. There's companies that have patented the specific cannabidiol on there, and that's kind of, I was going to use that, and there's a lot of, DEA regulation even on that, I think. But yeah, I'm going to revisit that project because I really think some of the things that we do with the ketogenic diet and supplementation will synergize, either be additive or synergistic with CBD. And I mean, I love this idea of developing very powerful therapies that make the patient come out more healthy or does not cripple their immune system or their general health when they come out the other side.
Especially with cancer. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible that you could have a more robust person post-therapy.
Absolutely. I think it's possible. So with cancer, it is tricky. Like every person is different. But if you get a robust, healthy person to begin with, and you can develop a therapy that manages their tumor, and I've seen very healthy people come out severely crippled after rounds of chemo. I've seen people killed with chemo. I mean, I know quite a few people, actually, sadly, that have been killed literally by the standard of care. And this, you should really have my colleague on here. He's a very dynamic speaker, a little bit controversial in some ways, but Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College, he wrote the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. And it's a fantastic book that, elegantly documents the theory of cancer as a metabolic disease with a lot of hard data. And Travis Christofferson wrote a book called Tripping Over the Truth. And I wrote the foreword to the book, which discusses why we view cancer as a genetic disease and kind of lays out the data and all the evidence to support cancer as a metabolic disease and what we should, most importantly, what we can do about that in regards. And that has major implications for not only how we treat cancer, but how we prevent cancer. So I talked about, fasting to purge your body of precancerous cells. So it would fall in line with that. But there's really good hard data behind this idea that cancer is maybe not necessarily all cancers are, metabolic in origin, but a large majority of them appear to be. And I think the National Cancer Institute and other organizations are aware of this, and now they're funding more grants that actually target cancer metabolism and even developing metabolic therapy clinics for, targeting tumor metabolism. So this never happened, 7-8 years ago when I got into this. It was kind of unheard of. But there's a lot of interest now in pharmaceutical companies developing these target molecules that inhibit specific glycolytic sugar-consuming pathways. So as evidence, the ketogenic diet is great, right? Because it hits many pathways in synergy. Like one of my slides, that I have in my conversation or in the presentations that I do is clearly shows, you can see all the boxes there. So this is the ketogenic diet, and these are all the different signaling pathways that it's working through. And I would say pharmaceutical companies may put billions of dollars just into one of those little boxes. The ketogenic diet works. It's so powerful because it's many different signaling, is many different pathways kind of working in synergy for a common output. And this particular slide was the neuropharmacological effect that it has on suppressing seizures, the anticonvulsant effect.
Wow.
So, and each one of these is validated with a number of peer-reviewed publications that you can bring up on PubMed. So it's not like something some guy put together. I mean, it's published, and it's like you go to PubMed, oh, HDAC activity. Okay, but there's like a half dozen publications to support each one of these. So that's what's really exciting to me, because there's just like so much to be kind of discovered in so many different applications. And like I said, it feeds back to nutrition, which was like one of the main things that motivated me, early on in college. So I can go back to something I'm really passionate about.
It's all fascinating, man, across the board. And thank you for sharing this, man. Thank you, really.
Thanks for giving me the platform.
Thanks for going on the Tim Ferriss show, and without that, I would have probably never
I got to thank Tim for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. And if somebody wanted to get started with this, what's the best resource? Like, what do you think would be the best way for them to read into it? And
I got a few. So I would say just go to our website. I have a website, Keto Nutrition, all one word, .org.
Okay.
And on that website, I have a list of resources from ebooks to, there's ketogenic pizza. There's
what? How do you make ketogenic pizza? What's that?
Is
it almond flour or something?
The crust is essentially like chicken and Parmesan cheese pounded into like a crust, where they put the cheese and the sauce on, or low carb sauce on top of that. Yeah, I love this stuff. It's Real Foods. Company is, I think someone told me that they're in Ralph's here, so I guess they're doing really well. But I'll have like one or two of those for breakfast in the morning, especially if I'm kind of on the go. They're legit. They're really, really good.
Wow.
Like, I've vetted out a lot of things and just kind of very particular towards things that I really like, and actually tested. So this is something that I've kind of like tested with blood work. So ketonutrition.org. I have a link there. If you click on that link, you get a discount on the product. Max Love Project is really, if there's families out there, parents out there that have kids that have cancer, please contact the Max Love Project. And they are helping so many families through innovative application of the ketogenic diet for childhood cancers. Virta Health, so type 2 diabetes is like the elephant in the room. There's a massive project. Virta Health is basically tackling this project by curing, literally, quote unquote, reversing type 2 diabetes in up to 100 million people in the next decade. I think that's really, and I talked about people who are just embarking just on diet alone or the ketogenic diet. Avatar Nutrition is a way that allows people to not only calculate their macros, because people are horrible calculating what they eat, but it has an algorithm in it that if you put in body composition changes on a weekly basis, it will tell you. It will guide you step by step to your ultimate goal. And as far as I know, there's no other system like that. It's like, think of Weight Watchers, but like a version like 5.0 in Weight Watchers that actually works with you. So I think I'm going to have all these resources on ketonutrition.org, but if you Google any of those terms, Keto Pet Sanctuary for people who have dogs that have epilepsy or dogs that have cancer, look up ketopetsanctuary.com. There's an ebook on there. It's completely free. You can download it and get the recipe on how to put your dog food together that can not only prevent or help treat cancer or seizures, but also just get your dog as healthy as possible. And the Charlie Foundation, I really have to give. I acknowledge the Charlie Foundation in my TEDx talk, and they were probably one of the leading foundations that really convinced me in talking with Hollywood producer Jim Abrams, and really convinced me that the ketogenic diet was legitimate outside of the peer-reviewed papers that I was reading. And there's a movie by Meryl Streep actually called First Do No Harm. So Meryl Streep did a movie on the ketogenic diet that most people look it up. It's called First Do No Harm.
Wow.
So Meryl Streep starred in a ketogenic diet movie.
That's incredible.
And it was, that movie really floored me because I had no idea that she did it actually. But it's that movie and meeting Jim Abrams and what the Charlie Foundation is doing through global education has really inspired me to pursue this path, all the people that they're helping. So it was so cool that I feel really blessed to be able to get into a field of research that is in line with what I was funded to do, which was enhance safety, performance, and resilience in the warfighter, but apply it to so many other things. and also apply it to myself, which has been kind of a journey in and of itself that I've really enjoyed.
Amazing stuff, man. Again, thank you very much. Thank you really.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
I can't thank you enough for being here. It just blew me away. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody. See ya.